The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October. I'd been with the Navajo Tribal Police for 12 years at that point, and middle-of-the-night calls weren't unusual. What was unusual was the tremor in the dispatcher's voice when she gave me the location. A remote stretch of desert about 40 miles northeast of Kayenta, near the Utah border. My name is Officer Jedediah Yazzie, and I've worked this territory long enough to know when something's genuinely wrong. The dispatcher told me a local named Mehitable Begay had called in, claiming she'd found what looked like human bones while searching for her lost sheep in the pre-dawn darkness. She was waiting by the main road, too scared to go back to where she'd made the discovery. I grabbed my gear, filled my thermos with the station's bitter coffee, and headed out into the cold desert night. The drive took me through some of the most desolate parts of the reservation. Miles of nothing but sagebrush and red rock formations that looked like sleeping giants in the darkness. My headlights cut through the void, occasionally catching the reflective eyes of a coyote or rabbit darting across the road. When I finally reached the coordinates, I found Mehitable's old pickup truck parked on the shoulder. She was sitting in the cab with the doors locked, and when my patrol vehicle's lights hit her windshield, I could see her face was pale with fear. She was a woman in her 60s, someone I'd known peripherally for years, the kind of person who'd lived on this land her entire life and wasn't easily rattled. I approached her vehicle and tapped gently on the window. She rolled it down just a crack, her weathered hands shaking slightly. "Officer Yazzie," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found something terrible out there." "Take your time, Mehitable," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Tell me what happened." She explained that 3 of her sheep had wandered off the previous evening. She'd waited until the early morning hours to search for them, knowing they often sought shelter in the rocky outcroppings during the cold nights. She'd been following their tracks with her flashlight when she'd stumbled upon something partially buried in a wash about 2 miles from the road. "At first I thought it was just old animal bones," she said, her voice catching. "We find those all the time out here. But then I saw the skull. It was human, Officer Yazzie. No doubt about it." I asked her to show me the location on my map, and she pointed to a spot with a trembling finger. It was an area known locally as Broken Ridge, a series of eroded sandstone formations that created natural hiding spots and caves. Drug runners occasionally used the area, but it had been quiet for the past few years. "Did you touch anything?" I asked. She shook her head vigorously. No. As soon as I realized what it was, I ran back to my truck and called you folks. I've lived here all my life, officer, and I know better than to disturb something like that." I thanked her and told her she could go home, that I'd handle it from here. But she insisted on waiting in her truck until backup arrived. "I don't want to leave you alone out there," she said. "Something doesn't feel right about this place tonight." I couldn't argue with her instinct. In my experience, when the desert felt wrong, it usually was. I radioed for backup and was told another officer, along with our coroner, Hezekiah Tom, would arrive within the hour. In the meantime, I grabbed my flashlight, camera, and evidence kit and set out to investigate. The walk from the road was treacherous in the darkness. The ground was uneven, full of loose rocks and sudden drops. Mehitable had given me good directions, though, and after about 20 minutes of careful hiking, my flashlight beam caught something white against the dark earth of a dried wash. As I approached, the full scope of what I was seeing became clear. It wasn't just a few scattered bones. It was a partially exposed skeleton, still largely intact. The skull was visible, along with part of the rib cage and one arm. The rest was buried under several inches of sand and debris that had accumulated from flash floods over what could have been months or years. The positioning seemed deliberate. This wasn't someone who had died from exposure and been naturally buried by the elements. The body appeared to have been placed in the wash intentionally, probably with the expectation that seasonal floods would scatter the remains or wash them away entirely. I began photographing the scene from multiple angles, careful not to disturb anything. As I worked, my flashlight caught something else. About 10 feet from the first skeleton, another patch of white. More bones. My stomach tightened as I realized we might be dealing with more than one victim. I marked the locations with evidence flags and continued searching the area. Within a 50-foot radius, I found signs of at least 3, possibly 4 different burial sites. Some were better hidden than others, covered with rocks and desert debris. It was clear that whoever had done this had used the natural landscape to their advantage, choosing a spot where flash floods and erosion would help conceal their crimes. The wind picked up as I worked, sending sand swirling around me. In the distance, I could hear coyotes calling to each other, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. Every shadow seemed to move in my peripheral vision, and I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder. By the time backup arrived, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Hezekiah Tom, our coroner, was a man in his 70s who'd been doing this job longer than anyone else in the department. He took one look at what I'd found and whistled low under his breath. "This is going to be a big operation," he said quietly. "We're going to need a full forensic team out here." The other officer who'd arrived was a younger woman named Patricia Littlecrow. She helped us secure the scene while Hezekiah made calls to bring in additional resources. By full daylight, we had a dozen people working the site, including forensic anthropologists from the FBI's field office in Phoenix. As the day wore on and the full extent of the burial site was revealed, the numbers became staggering. We found remains of at least 11 individuals, though some were so scattered and incomplete that getting an exact count would take weeks of analysis. The bones showed various stages of decomposition, suggesting the bodies had been placed there over a period of several years. What struck me most was the age range of the victims. Some of the skeletons were clearly adults, but others were much smaller. The forensic team estimated that at least 3 of the victims had been teenagers, possibly younger. That detail would haunt me for months afterward. Around midday, as the sun beat down mercilessly on our excavation site, one of the forensic technicians called me over. She'd found something buried with one of the bodies, a wallet, somehow partially preserved despite the conditions. Inside was a driver's license for someone named Robert Sinagini, who'd been reported missing from Tuba City 3 years earlier. Finally, we had a name to attach to one of these victims. Robert had been 23 years old, a construction worker who'd disappeared after leaving a bar one night. His family had searched for months, putting up posters, calling in tips that led nowhere. Now, at least, they would have closure, as brutal as it was. As word of the discovery spread through the local community, people began gathering along the road, watching our operation from a distance. Some were simply curious, but others came with photographs of missing family members, hoping and dreading in equal measure that we might have found their loved ones. Among the crowd was a local elder named Tabitha Salt. She was one of the most respected members of the community, someone who knew everyone and everything that happened within a 100-mile radius. When she approached me during a break, her face was grave. "Officer Yazzie," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. About 6 months ago, my grandson and his friends were riding their ATVs out near here. They came home talking about seeing a truck parked in this area at strange hours. Always at night, always with its lights off. They thought it might be drug runners, so they stayed away." "Did they get a description of the truck?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. "Dark-colored, maybe blue or black. Older model, they said. My grandson thought it might have been a Chevy from the 90s. He's good with vehicles." She paused, looking out at the excavation site. There's more. About 2 weeks ago, that same truck was seen again, but this time during the day. It was at the gas station in Kayenta. The driver was a white man, middle-aged, wearing work clothes like he was in construction or something. This was the first potential lead we'd had beyond the bones themselves. I took down all the details Tabitha could provide and promised to follow up with her grandson. As she walked away, she turned back to me one more time. "Be careful, Officer Yazzie," she said. "Whoever did this, they've been doing it for a long time without getting caught. That makes them either very smart or very lucky. Either way, they're dangerous." The excavation continued for 3 more days. Each morning, I'd arrive at the site to find the forensic team had uncovered more remains, more evidence of the horrors that had taken place in this remote stretch of desert. We found personal effects with some of the bodies, jewelry, scraps of clothing, the remnants of shoes. Each item was carefully cataloged, photographed, and sent for analysis. On the 3rd night, I was working late at the station, going through missing persons reports from the past decade, trying to match descriptions with what we'd found. The coffee had long gone cold, and my eyes were burning from staring at the computer screen. That's when I noticed a pattern. 7 of the missing persons reports from our jurisdiction and the surrounding areas mentioned that the victims had last been seen at or near construction sites. Different projects, different companies, but all construction-related. It was a thin connection, but it was something. I pulled up employment records for construction companies that had worked in the area over the past 10 years. It was a long list. The reservation had seen a lot of development in that time, from casino expansions to road improvement projects. But one name kept appearing on multiple projects: Desert Sun Construction, a small company based out of Flagstaff. More interesting was that Desert Sun Construction had filed for bankruptcy 8 months ago, right around the time Tabitha's grandson had last seen the mysterious truck in the area. The owner, listed as one Malachi Thorne, had seemingly vanished after the bankruptcy, leaving behind angry creditors and unfinished projects. I ran Malachi Thorne through our database. White male, 53 years old, with a record of minor offenses, mostly bar fights and DUIs from his younger years. His driver's license photo showed a weathered face with deep-set eyes and a gray-streaked beard. According to the records, he drove a '94 Chevrolet Silverado, dark blue. My pulse quickened. This could be our guy. I immediately called Hezekiah and the FBI team to share what I'd found. Within hours, a manhunt was underway. Thorne's photo was distributed to every law enforcement agency in the Southwest. His bank accounts were flagged, his credit cards monitored. But Thorne had vanished like smoke. His apartment in Flagstaff had been cleaned out months ago. His truck wasn't registered at any address. None of his known associates had heard from him since the bankruptcy. It was as if he'd been preparing for this moment, ready to disappear the instant his crimes were discovered. The investigation intensified over the following weeks. The FBI brought in additional resources, including profilers and forensic specialists. The remains were sent to labs for DNA analysis, hoping to identify more victims. Some families received the devastating confirmation they dreaded. Their missing loved ones were among the dead. Others continued to wait in agonizing uncertainty. One morning, about 3 weeks after the initial discovery, I received a call that made my blood run cold. A convenience store clerk in Farmington, New Mexico, about 100 miles from the burial site, had called in a tip. A man matching Thorne's description had been in the store the previous night, paying cash for gas and supplies. The security footage was grainy but clear enough to make a positive identification. He was still in the area. The Farmington lead changed everything. Within an hour of receiving the convenience store footage, I was in my patrol vehicle, racing toward the New Mexico border with 2 FBI agents following close behind. The store clerk who'd called in the tip said Thorne had purchased enough supplies for several days: canned food, water bottles, batteries, and notably several containers of lighter fluid. That last detail set off alarm bells. Why would someone on the run need that much lighter fluid? The convenience store was on the outskirts of Farmington, one of those 24-hour places that serviced truckers and late-night travelers. When we arrived, the clerk, a nervous young man named Danny, was waiting for us with the security footage queued up. The timestamp showed Thorne had been there at 2:17 a.m., less than 6 hours ago. He paid cash, Danny explained, his hands fidgeting with his name tag. Didn't say much, kept his head down, but I recognized him from the news alert you guys sent out. Soon as he left, I called it in. Did you see what he was driving? I asked. Danny nodded eagerly. Yeah, it was definitely that blue Chevy from the pictures. Had Arizona plates, but they were covered in mud. Couldn't make out the numbers. Which direction did he go when he left? North, toward Colorado, but there's a bunch of back roads up that way. He could have gone anywhere. We thanked Danny and immediately set up a search grid. The FBI agents coordinated with state police from New Mexico and Colorado, while I contacted other tribal officers familiar with the area. If Thorne was heading north, he was moving into even more remote territory, the kind of place where a man could disappear for months if he knew what he was doing. As we organized the search, my phone rang. It was Hezekiah Tom, our coroner, and his voice was grim. "Jedediah, we've identified 3 more victims through dental records," he said. All of them were workers on reservation construction projects. All of them were reported missing within the last 5 years. All worked for Desert Sun Construction, I asked. 2 did. The third worked for a subcontractor, but on a Desert Sun project. He paused. There's something else. We found evidence of restraint marks on several of the remains. Rope burns on wrist bones. Fractures consistent with struggle. These people didn't go quietly. The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying. Thorne hadn't just been killing randomly. He'd been targeting his own workers, possibly those who wouldn't be immediately missed. Transient laborers, people without close family ties. The construction industry was perfect cover. Workers came and went regularly, and if someone didn't show up for work, it was assumed they'd moved on to another job. 3 hours into the search, we got a break. A rancher near the Colorado border called in saying he'd seen a blue Chevy pickup parked off a dirt road near his property. The truck had been there since dawn, and he hadn't seen anyone around it. We approached the location with extreme caution. The truck was parked in a cluster of cottonwood trees about 200 yards from the main road. As we got closer, I could see camping gear in the truck bed, but no sign of Thorne. The FBI agents and I spread out, weapons drawn, approaching the vehicle from 3 sides. The truck was empty, keys still in the ignition. The interior reeked of cigarette smoke and something else, that distinctive smell of fear sweat that I'd encountered too many times in my career. "Blood," one of the FBI agents said, pointing to dark stains on the passenger seat. "Fresh, maybe a day old. But it wasn't a large amount, not enough to indicate serious injury. More like Thorne had cut himself on something, or..." I looked closer. There were defensive wounds on the dashboard, nail marks where someone had clawed at the plastic. "He had someone with him," I said, the realization hitting me like a cold wind. "Recent, within the last day or 2. We immediately called for cadaver dogs and a larger search team. If Thorne had taken another victim, we might still have a chance to save them. The thought that we'd been this close, that if we'd just been a few hours faster. While waiting for the search team, I explored the area around the truck. About 50 yards away, I found tire tracks leading deeper into the wilderness. ATV tracks, fresh ones. Thorne must have had an all-terrain vehicle hidden here, a backup plan. The tracks led northwest toward the San Juan Mountains. It was rough country up there, full of abandoned mines and old logging camps. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be found, but also dangerous, especially with winter approaching. The temperature dropped below freezing at night, and the first snows weren't far off. The search team arrived with dogs within the hour. The German shepherds immediately picked up a scent trail from the truck, leading in the same direction as the ATV tracks. We followed on foot and in vehicles where possible, the dogs straining against their leads. About 3 miles in, the dogs suddenly became agitated, barking and pulling toward a ravine off the main trail. My heart sank, expecting to find another body. But what we found was somehow more disturbing. It was a makeshift camp, recently abandoned. The fire pit still had warm embers. Empty food cans were scattered around, the labels matching what Thorne had bought at the convenience store. But there were also restraints, zip ties cut and discarded, duct tape with hair stuck to it, and blood, more blood, on the rocks near the fire pit. He definitely had someone, the lead FBI agent said, photographing the scene. And based on this, they're still alive. We pushed harder, following the trail deeper into the mountains. The terrain became increasingly difficult, forcing us to abandon the vehicles and continue on foot. The dogs never lost the scent, pulling us forward with unwavering determination. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and red, one of the dogs alerted to something ahead. Through my binoculars, I could see a structure, an old mining shack, partially collapsed but still standing. Smoke was rising from a metal pipe that served as a chimney. We surrounded the shack as quietly as possible. I could hear voices inside, Thorne's gravelly tone, and another, higher, frightened. A young woman, from the sound of it. She was crying, begging. The FBI agents wanted to wait for a tactical team, but I knew we didn't have time. Thorne was escalating, becoming more desperate. That lighter fluid he'd bought, I had a terrible feeling about what he intended to do. "This is Officer Jedediah Yazzie of the Navajo Tribal Police," I called out, my voice echoing off the mountain walls. "Malachi Thorne, we have you surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." There was a moment of silence, then a crash from inside the shack. The woman screamed. I heard Thorne yelling something unintelligible, then the distinctive sound of liquid being poured. The smell of lighter fluid drifted out through the gaps in the walls. We couldn't wait. I kicked in the door, my weapon raised, just as Thorne was raising a lit Zippo lighter. He was standing over a young woman, probably in her 20s, tied to a chair. She was soaked in lighter fluid, her eyes wide with terror. Thorne himself was also drenched in the accelerant, his clothes dark with it. "Drop the lighter, Thorne," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It's over." Thorne laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Over? It's been over for a while now, officer. You just didn't know it." "Those people you killed," I said, trying to keep him talking while the FBI agents maneuvered for better positions. "They were your workers. Why?" "Workers?" He laughed again. "They were witnesses. Every single one of them saw something they shouldn't have. Figured things out. Started asking questions. Questions about what?" His eyes darted to the young woman. She was trembling violently, tears streaming down her face. I recognized her then. Maria Beggy, a waitress from a diner in Kayenta who'd been reported missing 2 days ago. Not connected to construction at all. Thorne's pattern was breaking down. "She reminded me of the first one," Thorne said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Back in '09, young thing working on the casino expansion. Caught me skimming from the project funds, threatened to report me. Couldn't let that happen, could I? So you killed her." "I didn't mean to," he said, and for a moment he almost sounded remorseful. "It was an accident. But then I had a body to deal with, found that wash near Broken Ridge. Perfect place. The desert keeps its secrets, you know. But it didn't stop there. No. His hand holding the lighter was shaking now. Once you cross that line, it gets easier. Another worker saw me near the wash, had to deal with him too. Then another started asking about missing coworkers. It snowballed. Each one was just necessary. And Maria? She's not connected to your construction business. Thorne's face twisted. I saw her at the diner. She smiled at me the same way the first one did. Brought it all back. I couldn't let her go. In that moment of distraction, talking about his first victim. Thorne's attention wavered. The hand holding the lighter dropped slightly. It was the opening I needed. I lunged forward, grabbing his wrist and forcing the lighter away from Maria. Thorne was stronger than he looked, fighting with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. We crashed into the shack's wall, old wood splintering under our weight. The FBI agents rushed in, helping to subdue Thorne. The lighter fell to the floor, still burning. One of the agents quickly stomped it out while I held Thorne down. The entire shack reeked of lighter fluid. If that flame had touched any of us, we'd all have gone up in flames. Thorne continued to struggle, screaming incoherently about the desert, about secrets, about how we didn't understand. It took 3 of us to get him in restraints. Even then, he didn't stop fighting, thrashing against the cuffs until his wrists were bloody. While the agents dealt with Thorne, I cut Maria free from the chair. She collapsed against me, sobbing with relief. She was dehydrated and had some bruises, but she was alive. That's what mattered. You're safe now, I told her, wrapping her in my jacket. We're going to get you home. As the helicopter arrived to evacuate Maria and take Thorne into custody, I stood outside the shack, looking out over the darkening mountains. In the distance, I could see the lights of the reservation, tiny pinpricks in the vast darkness. Tabitha Salt had been right. Thorne had been either very smart or very lucky, managing to hide his crimes for over a decade. But in the end, his own demons had caught up with him. The compulsion that had driven him to kill had also been his undoing. The investigation continued for months afterward. Thorne eventually confessed to killing 17 people, though we only ever found remains of 14. He claimed the other 3 were buried in different locations, places he'd forgotten or refused to reveal. He was sentenced to life without parole, though many felt that wasn't justice enough for what he'd done. The families of the victims finally had answers, though I'm not sure if that brought them peace. How do you find peace knowing your loved one died because they happened to work for the wrong man, or asked the wrong question, or simply smiled in a way that triggered a killer's twisted memories? I still think about that case, especially when I drive past Broken Ridge. The desert has reclaimed the site now, wind and rain erasing the scars of our excavation, but I know what lies beneath that peaceful surface. The desert does keep its secrets, but sometimes, with enough persistence and a little luck, we can uncover them. The young woman, Maria, recovered physically, though I know the psychological scars will last much longer. She sent me a thank you card a few months later, saying she was moving to Phoenix to be closer to family. I hope she's found some measure of peace there, far from the high desert and its buried horrors. As for me, the case changed something fundamental in how I view my job. I'd always known there was evil in the world, but Thorne taught me that it could hide in plain sight, behind a normal face and a construction company logo. It made me more vigilant, more suspicious perhaps, but also more determined to protect the people under my jurisdiction. Because out here in the vast expanses of the reservation, where the nearest help might be hours away, sometimes we're all that stands between the innocent and the predators who walk among them. And sometimes, like that night in the mountains, We get there just in time. The bones beneath Monument Valley have all been returned to their families now, properly laid to rest with the ceremonies and dignity they deserved. But I know there are other secrets out there, other bones waiting to be discovered, other predators hiding behind masks of normalcy. That's why I keep doing this job, despite the nightmares it sometimes brings. Someone has to stand guard. Someone has to be willing to dig up the truth, no matter how deeply it's been buried. And in this vast desert, under these endless skies, that someone is me and my fellow officers watching over our people, ready to face whatever darkness emerges from the shadows. 3 months had passed since we'd arrested Malachi Thorne. The media coverage had finally died down, and life on the reservation was returning to something resembling normal. I thought the case was closed, filed away with all the other dark chapters of my career. I was wrong. The call came on a cold February morning. Hezekiah Tom's voice was tense when he spoke. "Jedediah, you need to come to the morgue. We found something." The drive to the tribal police headquarters in Window Rock took 2 hours through a light snowfall. The medical examiner's office was in the basement, a sterile, fluorescent-lit space that always made me uncomfortable. Hezekiah was waiting for me, along with 2 FBI agents I didn't recognize. "What's this about?" I asked, noting the grim expressions on everyone's faces. Hezekiah led us to an examination table where skeletal remains were carefully laid out. "Remember victim number 12? The one we could only partially reconstruct?" I nodded. It had been one of the most deteriorated sets of remains, scattered across the widest area. "We finally got the DNA results back," he continued. The victim's name was Michael Yazzie. The name hit me like a physical blow. Yazzie was my family name, though it was common enough on the reservation. "Related to me?" "Your second cousin, from your father's side. He went missing in 2011. I had a vague memory of family talking about a cousin who'd left for work and never came home. But with such a large, extended family, and with people often leaving the reservation for opportunities elsewhere, it hadn't seemed unusual at the time. "That's not all," one of the FBI agents interjected. She was a tall woman with sharp features and intelligent eyes. "Agent Sarah Chen, and this is Agent Robert Kim. We've been reviewing Thorne's financial records as part of the asset forfeiture process. We found something that doesn't add up." She spread several documents on a nearby desk. Bank statements, invoices, contracts. Thorne's construction company was hemorrhaging money for years, yet he kept winning bids for reservation projects. He was underbidding competitors by margins that should have bankrupted him. "Money laundering?" I suggested. "That's what we thought initially. But look at this." Agent Kim pulled up a laptop showing a complex spreadsheet. Every project where a worker went missing, Thorne received a large cash payment within a week, always from different sources, always just under the reporting threshold. "Someone was paying him," I said, the implication sinking in. "Someone was paying him to kill." "Or to make people disappear," Agent Chen corrected. "We think Thorne was a contractor in more ways than one. Someone was using him to eliminate specific individuals and making it look random." I thought about my cousin Michael. He'd been working on a casino project, but he'd also been involved in tribal politics, advocating for stricter oversight of construction contracts. Had he discovered something that made him a target? "We need to talk to Thorne again," I said. "He's not talking," Agent Kim replied. "His lawyer has him clamped up tight. But we have another lead. Tabitha Salt, the elder who gave you information about the truck. She reached out to us yesterday. Said she remembered something else." We drove to Tabitha's home, a modest house on the outskirts of Kayenta. She greeted us with traditional fry bread and coffee, but her expression was troubled. "I've been having dreams," she said, which might have sounded crazy from anyone else, but among the Navajo, dreams were often taken seriously. Dreams about the bones. But in my dreams, they're not random victims. They're connected like a web. "Connected how?" I asked. She pulled out an old photo album, pages yellow with age. My late husband kept track of everything that happened on the reservation. Every development project, every political dispute, every suspicious death. She opened to a page covered in newspaper clippings. "Look at the dates." Each clipping was about a different issue. A protest against a proposed uranium mine, a corruption investigation into casino finances, a dispute over water rights. And next to each clipping, written in careful handwriting, were names. Names I recognized from our victim list. "They were all involved in fighting something," Tabitha said. "Different fights, but always against powerful interests. Your cousin Michael, he found evidence that construction funds were being diverted. Patricia Begay was going to testify about illegal dumping on sacred lands. Robert Tsinagini had documents about water rights violations." The pattern was clear now. Thorne hadn't been choosing victims randomly from his workforce. He'd been given specific targets, people who posed threats to various interests. The construction work was just cover, a way to get close to the victims. "Who would have the power to coordinate something like this?" Agent Chen asked. Tabitha was quiet for a long moment. "There's a man. Calls himself a business consultant. Archibald Holbrook. He's been around for 15 years, always in the background of major deals. Never the face of anything, but always there." I'd heard the name. Holbrook was known as a fixer, someone who made problems go away for wealthy clients. But he was smart, keeping his hands clean, working through intermediaries. "We need evidence connecting Holbrook to Thorne," Agent Kim said. "Without that, we have nothing but speculation." That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought that my cousin had been murdered, that all those people had died not randomly but as targeted killings, made the case even more horrifying. I kept thinking about Thorne's words in that mountain shack, about witnesses, about people who asked questions. The next morning, I decided to visit Thorne in federal prison. It was a 4-hour drive to the facility in Phoenix. Thorne looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, older. Prison had not been kind to him. "Officer Yazzie," he said, a bitter smile on his face. "Come to gloat?" "I came for answers," I said. "About the payments, about who was really behind the killings." His smile faded. "I don't know what you're talking about. My cousin was one of your victims, Michael Yazzie. You remember him?" Something flickered in Thorne's eyes. Fear? Regret? "I remember all of them," he said quietly. "Someone paid you to kill him. Who?" Thorne was silent for a long moment. Then, "You think I'm the monster in this story, but I'm just the weapon. The real monsters are the ones who aimed me, pulled the trigger. Give me names. I give you names, I'm dead within a week. Even in here, they have reach. You're already serving life without parole. What do you have to lose?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really don't understand, do you? This goes so much deeper than you think. Construction contracts, casino money, land rights, water access, billions of dollars at stake. And your cousin, he was smart. Too smart. Tell me about Holbrook." Thorne's face went pale. "I never said that name. You didn't have to." He leaned back, studying me. "You know what the funny thing is? I actually tried to warn some of them. Told them to back off, to stop digging. Your cousin included. But they wouldn't listen. They all thought they could fight the system. So you killed them. I followed orders. Just like you do, officer. Only difference is my bosses weren't wearing badges." I left the prison with more questions than answers. Thorne had essentially confirmed our suspicions, but wouldn't provide the evidence we needed. We were at a dead end. That changed 3 days later. I was at home just finishing dinner when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Officer Yazzie?" The voice was female, scared. "My name is Beth Franklin. I was Malachi Thorne's bookkeeper. I need to talk to you." We arranged to meet at a truck stop halfway between Flagstaff and the reservation. Beth was a small woman in her 50s, nervous as a rabbit. She kept looking over her shoulder as we talked. "I knew something was wrong with the books," she said. "And the payments didn't match the work, but Malachi said it was none of my business. Paid me extra to keep quiet." "What changed?" "I saw the news. All those people. I can't sleep knowing I might have been part of it." She pulled out a flash drive. I kept copies of everything. Financial records, emails, even some recorded phone conversations. Malachi didn't know I was covering myself. I took the drive, my hand trembling slightly. "Are you willing to testify?" "If you can keep me safe. There are people who won't want this information getting out." That flash drive was the break we needed. It contained 5 years of records showing systematic payments from a complex web of shell companies, all eventually tracing back to a consulting firm owned by Archibald Holbrook. More damning were the recorded conversations where Thorne received specific instructions, names, and locations. The FBI moved fast. Within 48 hours, they had warrants for Holbrook and 3 associates. But when they went to serve them, Holbrook was gone. His house was empty, his office cleaned out. He'd fled the moment Beth Franklin had contacted us. 2 weeks later, Holbrook's body was found in a hotel room in Juarez, Mexico. The official cause of death was suicide, but the circumstances were suspicious. No note, no warning signs, and the security footage from the hotel had mysteriously been erased. With Holbrook dead, the full extent of the conspiracy began to unravel. The FBI uncovered connections to corrupt officials, business leaders, even some law enforcement. It was a network of greed and murder that had operated for over a decade, eliminating anyone who threatened their interests. But something still bothered me. A week after Holbrook's death, I went back to visit Tabitha Salt. She was working in her garden when I arrived, planting corn despite the lingering cold. "You knew more than you told us," I said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. She nodded slowly. "Some knowledge is dangerous to have, Officer Yazzie. I gave you what you needed, when you needed it. People died. My cousin died. And many more would have died if you hadn't stopped it." She looked at me with those ancient eyes. "Sometimes we can't save everyone. Sometimes we can only avenge them." As I drove home that night, I thought about all the victims. They'd died for trying to protect the land, the water, the people. They'd been silenced for asking questions, for demanding justice. But in the end, their bones had spoken from beneath the desert sand. The official investigation continued for another year. Dozens of arrests were made, though many of the key players managed to escape justice through legal technicalities or convenient deaths. The reservation implemented new oversight measures for construction contracts, and a monument was erected near Broken Ridge to honor the victims. I still visit that monument sometimes. 17 names are carved into the stone, including my cousin Michael's. When the wind blows through the nearby canyons, it sounds almost like whispers, like the dead are still trying to tell their stories. Thorne died in prison 6 months later. The official cause was a heart attack, but I had my doubts. He'd been scheduled to testify in a federal corruption case the following week. Another convenient death in a case full of them. Beth Franklin entered witness protection and disappeared. I hope she's safe somewhere, living under a new name, finally able to sleep peacefully. She showed more courage than anyone should have to, coming forward when she did. As for me, the case left scars that will never fully heal. Every missing person report now carries the weight of possibility. Is this another random disappearance, or is someone being silenced? The trust I once had in the system has been forever shaken. But I keep doing the job, because if officers like me don't stand watch, if we don't dig for the truth no matter how deeply it's buried, then the Malachi Thorns and Archibald Holbrooks of the world win. And I can't let that happen. The desert keeps its secrets, yes. But sometimes, with persistence and courage and a little luck, we can force it to give them up. And when we do, we owe it to the victims to see justice done. Even if that justice is imperfect, even if it comes too late. 5 years have passed since we uncovered the mass grave at Broken Ridge. 5 years since the arrests, the investigations, the convenient deaths. I thought I'd moved on, filed it all away in that compartment of my mind where cops store the horrors we've witnessed. But the desert has a way of bringing the past back to the surface. It started 3 weeks ago. I was training a rookie officer, showing him the patrol routes through the more remote sections of the reservation. We were near Broken Ridge. I rarely go there anymore, but he needed to know the area. That's when we saw it. Fresh tire tracks leading off the main road, heading toward the old burial site. Kids, probably. The rookie, Officer James Benally, suggested. Coming out here to ghost hunt. That place has a reputation now. He was probably right. The site had become something of a dark tourism destination, despite our efforts to keep people away. But something about those tracks bothered me. They were too deliberate, too direct. Whoever made them knew exactly where they were going. I decided to follow up that evening, alone. Call it intuition or paranoia, but I'd learned to trust my gut over the years. As I approached the site in the dying light, I saw a figure standing among the rocks. It was Tabitha Salt, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever. "I've been expecting you, Jedediah," she said, without turning around. "What are you doing out here, Tabitha?" "Paying my respects and waiting." She turned to face me, and in the twilight her eyes seemed to hold shadows. "Do you know what today is?" I thought for a moment. March 15th. The anniversary. 5 years exactly since you found them. She gestured to the ground, where we'd excavated all those bodies. The dead don't rest easy when justice is incomplete. We did everything we could. Thorne's dead. Holbrook's dead. Dozens of people went to prison. The foot soldiers went to prison, she corrected. The real power? They're still out there. They just learned to hide better. Before I could respond, my radio crackled. Dispatch was calling about a situation at the tribal police station. Hezekiah Tom had called in a panic, saying someone had broken into the evidence archives. I raced back to find chaos. The archive room had been ransacked, but selectively. Only files related to the Broken Ridge case were disturbed. And one box was missing entirely, the one containing Beth Franklin's flash drive and the backup copies we'd made. "Security footage?" I asked the duty officer. "System went down an hour ago. Convenient malfunction." Hezekiah was in his office, visibly shaken. "They took everything, Jedediah. All the physical evidence we kept, the dental records, the DNA samples, everything that could identify the remaining victims." "Why now, after 5 years?" "Because someone's trying to bury this for good," he said. "I got a call yesterday. Someone asking about the unidentified remains, whether we were still running DNA comparisons. I said yes, that we never stopped trying to identify victims." "Who called?" "They said they were from the FBI, following up on cold cases. But when I called the FBI office to confirm, they had no record of the inquiry." My blood ran cold. Someone was still out there, someone with enough power and resources to orchestrate this. Someone who'd been watching, waiting, believing the case was truly closed. That night I went home and pulled out my personal copies of the case files. Copies I wasn't supposed to have, but old habits die hard. I spread them across my kitchen table, looking for something, anything we might have missed. That's when I noticed it. In one of Thorne's financial records, there was a recurring payment to a property management company. The company had been investigated and cleared. It was legitimate, just managing rental properties. But the address of one property kept appearing, a warehouse on the outskirts of Farmington. I should have called for backup, should have notified the FBI. But after the break-in at the station, I didn't know who to trust. So I went alone, driving through the night to Farmington. The warehouse was in an industrial area surrounded by similar buildings, all dark and silent. But this one had new locks, fresh tire tracks in the dirt outside, and a single light burning in an upper window. I pulled out my phone to record what I was seeing, then approached carefully. The main door was locked, but a side entrance was slightly ajar. The smell hit me immediately. Chemicals. Formaldehyde. The same smell as Hezekiah's morgue. Inside, the warehouse had been converted into something else. Plastic sheeting covered the walls. Industrial freezers hummed in the corner. And in the center of the room, examination tables. This wasn't just a warehouse, it was an off-the-books morgue. Files were stacked on a desk in the corner. I photographed everything I could. Documents, medical equipment, even what looked like cremation records. Someone had been using this place to make bodies disappear, possibly for years. A sound from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps. Multiple sets. I moved toward the exit, but voices were coming from that direction now. I was trapped. I hid behind one of the freezers, weapon drawn, phone still recording. 3 men entered the main room. I didn't recognize 2 of them, but the third made my heart stop. It was Deputy Director Harold Morrison from the State Police, someone who'd been instrumental in the original investigation, someone we'd trusted completely. "Everything's been moved from the tribal station," one man said. "Archives are clean." Morrison nodded. "Good. What about the old man, the coroner?" "Hezekiah Tom? He's been asking questions, making calls. Then he needs to have an accident. Make it believable. Old man, dangerous roads, tragic, but not suspicious." I wanted to rush out, arrest them all, but I was outnumbered and outgunned. Instead, I kept recording, gathering evidence. "The Franklin woman?" the third man asked. "Already handled. Car accident in Ohio last month. Witness protection only works if we don't run it." Beth Franklin was dead. They'd found her, killed her, even though she was supposed to be safe. The rage I felt was almost overwhelming. They continued talking, discussing names I recognized, journalists who'd covered the case, activists who'd demanded further investigation. A kill list disguised as contingency planning. Then Morrison said something that chilled me to the bone. "Officer Yazzie been sniffing around again. Tabitha Salt, too. They both need to go, but carefully. Too many convenient deaths raise questions." "The old woman's easy," one man replied. "Natural causes at her age won't surprise anyone. And Yazzie? Line of duty death, set up a traffic stop gone wrong. We've done it before." They had. I thought about Officer Justin Hare from New Mexico, killed during what seemed like a routine traffic stop. How many other line-of-duty deaths had actually been executions? I needed to get out, to get this recording to someone trustworthy. But as I moved toward a rear exit, my phone vibrated. The battery warning. In my rush to investigate, I'd forgotten to charge it. The screen went dark just as Morrison started naming more targets. I made it out through a loading dock, my hands shaking as I reached my vehicle. I drove for miles before pulling over to catch my breath. The recording was saved, but my phone was dead. I needed to get somewhere safe, charge it, and upload everything to multiple locations. I drove to the one person I knew I could trust, Tabitha Salt. She was awake when I arrived, as if she'd been expecting me. "They're going to kill us both," I told her, explaining everything I'd discovered. She listened calmly, then said, "I know. I've known for weeks. Why do you think I was at Broken Ridge? I was saying goodbye. We need to run, get you somewhere safe. I'm 83 years old, Jedediah. I'm not running anywhere." She pulled out an old laptop. "But we can make sure the truth survives us." We spent the next 3 hours uploading everything to encrypted servers, sending copies to journalists, civil rights organizations, even international human rights groups. The recording, the photos, everything. As dawn broke, we heard vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles. They'd found us. "Go," Tabitha said. "Out to the back." My grandson left his dirt bike behind the shed. "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are. Someone needs to survive to verify the evidence." She smiled, a fierce expression. "Besides, I'm an old woman. What are they going to do? Shoot me in my own home? Let them try to explain that." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. The dirt bike got me into the backcountry where I knew trails they couldn't follow in vehicles. Behind me, I heard sirens, then gunshots, then nothing. That was 3 days ago. I'm writing this from a location I won't disclose, using a connection I trust is secure. Tabitha Salt is dead. The news says natural causes, a heart attack. But I know better. Hezekiah Tom died in a car accident yesterday. Drove off a cliff in broad daylight on a road he'd traveled for 40 years. They're coming for me. Morrison has labeled me a person of interest in the evidence theft, claiming I've gone rogue. They've frozen my accounts, canceled my credentials. I'm officially a fugitive. But the evidence is out there now. Journalists are starting to ask questions. The FBI, the real FBI, has opened a new investigation. Morrison and his associates don't know it yet, but their time is running out. I won't be able to hide forever. They'll find me eventually. When they do, this account will be my testimony. The bones at Broken Ridge were just the beginning. The conspiracy didn't die with Thorne and Holbrook. It evolved, adapted, burrowed deeper into the system. How many other mass graves are out there? How many other Officer Yazdis have been silenced over the years? How many Beth Franklins have died in convenient accidents? I think about my cousin Michael often. He died fighting for truth, for justice. So did Tabitha Salt and Hezekiah Tom. So have countless others whose names we'll never know. The desert keeps its secrets, but not forever. Wind and rain eventually expose what's been buried. Truth has a way of surfacing, even if it takes years. Even if those who seek it pay the ultimate price. If you're reading this and I'm gone, know that we tried. Know that there are good people still fighting. Don't let them bury the truth again. Don't let the bones be forgotten. Watch for the signs, the convenient deaths, the missing evidence, the investigations that go nowhere. They're all connected. Threads in a web that spans decades and reaches into places you'd never suspect. Trust no one completely. Question everything. And remember, in the high desert of the Navajo Nation, beneath the beautiful monuments and painted landscapes, secrets lie buried. Some are meant to stay that way. Others demand to be brought into the light, no matter the cost. My name is Officer Jedediah Yazzie. I was a Navajo Tribal Police officer for 12 years. I found the bones at Broken Ridge. And now I'm probably going to become one of them. But the truth will survive me. It has to. My name is Officer Nehemiah Sosi, and I've been with the Navajo Tribal Police for 8 years. I've handled domestic disputes, drug cases, missing persons, the usual mix of tragedy and violence that comes with policing a territory larger than some states. But nothing prepared me for what started as a routine stalking complaint in the summer of 2023. It began on a scorching July afternoon. I was finishing paperwork at the station in Chinle when a woman came in, asking to speak with an officer. Her name was Sophronia Nez, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher who lived alone in a small house about 15 miles outside of town. She was visibly shaken, constantly looking over her shoulder, her hands trembling as she filled out the complaint form. "It started about 3 weeks ago," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Little things at first. I'd come home and find my gate open when I knew I'd closed it. My trash cans moved, footprints around my windows." I'd heard similar complaints before. Living in isolated areas, people sometimes got paranoid, mistaking animal activity for human intrusion. But something about Sophronia's demeanor told me this was different. She wasn't paranoid, she was terrified. "Have you seen anyone?" I asked, taking notes. "Once. Last Tuesday night, around 2 in the morning. I woke up because my dog was going crazy, barking and scratching at the back door. When I looked out the kitchen window, there was a man standing at the edge of my property, just watching my house. Can you describe him?" She shook her head. "It was too dark, but he was tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. When I turned on the porch light, he didn't run. He just stepped backward into the shadows and disappeared." "Any idea who it might be? An ex-boyfriend? Someone you've had problems with?" "That's what's so unsettling," she said. "I can't think of anyone. I've lived here for 5 years, keep to myself mostly. I teach 3rd grade. The worst conflict I've had is with parents who think their kids deserve better grades." I told her I'd increase patrols around her property and gave her my direct number, standard procedure for stalking complaints. But I also suggested she stay with friends or family for a while, just to be safe. She said she'd think about it. 3 days later, she called me at 11 p.m. Her voice was different. Controlled panic. "He's here," she whispered, "in my yard. I can see him through the bedroom window." I was 20 minutes away, but I drove it in 12. Lights and sirens the whole way. When I arrived, the property was dark except for a single light in what I assumed was her bedroom. I did a perimeter check first, flashlight sweeping the desert brush around her small adobe house. Fresh footprints circled the entire building. Size 11 boots, worn tread. They led from the road, around the house multiple times, and concentrated beneath the bedroom window. But whoever made them was gone. Sophronia let me in. Her dog, a German Shepherd mix, still agitated and pacing. She showed me what she'd found that had prompted her call. A photograph placed on her bedroom windowsill outside. It was a picture of her, taken from a distance while she was teaching her class. The angle suggested it was shot from outside the classroom window. "This was taken yesterday," she said. "I was wearing that same dress. He's been watching me at work too." The violation of her workplace, a place she should feel safe, elevated this beyond simple stalking. This was systematic surveillance, planned and deliberate. I bagged the photo as evidence and called for backup to help canvass the area. My partner that night was Officer Patricia Littlecrow. We found more footprints leading to a small rise about 100 yards from the house, a perfect vantage point. Cigarette butts littered the ground. He'd been there for hours, maybe regularly. "We need to take this seriously," Patricia said, examining the scene. "This level of obsession, it escalates." I agreed. We convinced Sophronia to stay with her sister in Farmington for a few days while we investigated. I had the cigarette butts sent for DNA analysis and started checking with local shops to see if anyone matching the vague description had been buying film or asking about Sophronia. That's when things took a turn I didn't expect. 2 days after Sophronia left for Farmington, I got a call from my wife, Rebecca. She was upset, scared. "There was a man here," she said, "at the house. He knocked on the door, said he was looking for Officer Sosi. When I said you were at work, he just stood there, staring at me through the screen door." "What did he look like?" "Tall, skinny, gave me the creeps. He had these pale gray eyes like a wolf's. He finally said to tell you that Sophronia's friend stopped by. Then he left." My blood ran cold. This stalker had found my home, my family. The message was clear: back off, or you're next. I immediately moved Rebecca and our 2 kids to her mother's house in Gallup. Then I went back to Sophronia's property with a forensics team. We needed to find more evidence, something that could identify this guy before he escalated further. That's when we found the bunker. It was about 300 yards from Sophronia's house, hidden in a natural depression and covered with camouflaged netting. Inside was a makeshift living space: sleeping bag, camp stove, water bottles, and hundreds of photographs. All of Sophronia. At home, at work, shopping, even through her bathroom window. Some dated back months. But there were also newer additions. Photos of me arriving at her house, of Patricia doing the perimeter check, of my wife at our home, taken that very morning. Among the photos, we found a journal. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost mechanical. It detailed Sophronia's daily routines, her habits, her preferences. But the recent entries were about me. Officer Nehemiah Sosi, married, 2 children, lives at 423 Desert Rose Lane. Wife is Rebecca, nurse at Chinley Hospital. Children attend Chinley Elementary. He arrives at work at 7 a.m., leaves around 6 p.m. unless on call. Drives personal vehicle, 2019 Toyota Tacoma, black. He's the problem now. He needs to understand boundaries. The last entry, dated that morning, was chilling. If he won't stop interfering, I'll have to make him. Sophie belongs with someone who truly understands her, who's watched over her, protected her. These tribal cops think they own this land, but they're just obstacles, removable obstacles. The journal identified him only as Ichabod. Clearly not a real name, but the kind of pseudonym someone with delusions of grandeur might choose. We ran the DNA from the cigarette butts, but got no matches in the system. Whoever this was, he'd never been arrested, never been in the military, never had a government job requiring DNA sampling. I put out an alert to all officers, describing what little we knew. But the reservation is vast, with thousands of places to hide. And Ichabod had proven he was smart, careful, and patient. A week passed with no sightings. Sophronia remained in Farmington, but she was growing restless, wanting to return to her job, her life. I couldn't blame her, but I also couldn't guarantee her safety. Then, on a Wednesday evening, I was driving home from the station. Not to my house, but to a motel where I'd been staying since the threat, when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. The vehicle was keeping pace, maintaining the same distance for miles. I took a sudden turn onto a dirt road. The vehicle followed. I sped up, it sped up. I killed my lights and pulled behind an abandoned building. The vehicle slowly cruised past, an old white van, no plates visible. I radioed for backup and tried to follow, but the van disappeared into the maze of back roads that crisscrossed the reservation. By the time other units arrived, there was no trace of it. That night, back at the motel, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photo of me at the motel, taken from the parking lot. On the back, written in that same neat handwriting, "You can't protect her forever, or yourself." The psychological warfare was taking its toll. I was exhausted, paranoid, checking over my shoulder constantly. My family was scared, my wife begging me to request a transfer, to let someone else handle the case. But I couldn't. This had become personal. Ichabod had made it personal. 3 weeks into the investigation, we caught a break. A gas station attendant in Mexican Water reported a man matching Ichabod's description buying supplies. Tall, thin, gray eyes, paying cash. But this time, he'd made a mistake. The attendant noticed him getting into a white van and caught a partial plate number. The van was registered to Ichabod Crane. Obviously a fake name, but the address was real. A property near Tiknospos, right on the Arizona-New Mexico border. Patricia and I, along with 4 other officers, approached the property at dawn. It was an old trading post abandoned for decades, slowly being reclaimed by the desert. The white van was parked outside. We entered carefully, weapons drawn. The inside had been converted into a disturbing shrine. Every wall was covered with photos of Sophronia, dating back at least 2 years. But there were also photos of other women, dozens of them. Some I recognized as missing persons cases from across the Four Corners region. In a back room, we found IDs, jewelry, personal items, trophies. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't just a stalker. This was a serial predator who'd been operating for years, and Sophronia was his current obsession. But Ichabod himself was gone. The place had been recently abandoned. Coffee still warm on a makeshift desk. Computer still logged in. He'd been warned somehow, fled just before we arrived. On the computer, we found his real identity, Ichabod Daicher, a 38-year-old former military intelligence officer who'd been discharged for psychological reasons 5 years prior. His training explained how he'd managed to surveil and evade so effectively. His psychological records, which we obtained through a federal warrant, painted a picture of escalating delusion and obsession, particularly with women he perceived as pure or in need of protection. The manhunt intensified. Federal agencies got involved. Sophronia was placed in protective custody. But Dacre had vanished like smoke. His military training had taught him how to disappear, how to live off the grid, how to become a ghost. 2 months passed. The official search was scaled back. Resources redirected to other cases. But I couldn't let it go. Neither could Sophronia, who was living in a kind of prison, afraid to return to her normal life. Then, in late September, a hiker found a body in a canyon near Monument Valley. Male, matching Dacre's description. He'd been dead for weeks, cause of death appearing to be a fall from the canyon rim. Case closed, everyone said. The threat was over. Sophronia could go home, resume her life. I could stop looking over my shoulder, but something bothered me about the body. The injuries were consistent with a fall, but there were also defensive wounds on his hands, bruising on his throat. The medical examiner dismissed them as consistent with trying to catch himself as he fell, but I wasn't convinced. The night after we found Dacre's body, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over the crime scene photos, the positioning of the body, those defensive wounds. Something was wrong with the narrative that he'd simply fallen while hiking. The location itself was suspicious. Why would a man obsessed with Sophronia, who'd been methodically stalking her for years, suddenly go hiking in a remote canyon? I decided to visit the scene myself. The canyon was about 2 hours from Shinli, a narrow gash in the earth surrounded by nothing but desert and wind-carved rock. The spot where Daicher had allegedly fallen was a good half-mile hike from the nearest road. Not impossible, but odd for someone who'd shown no interest in hiking in any of his surveillance notes. At the rim where he'd supposedly fallen, I found something the initial investigation had missed or ignored. Drag marks in the dirt, partially obscured by wind but still visible. Someone had dragged something heavy to the edge. And there were tire tracks about 50 yards away, different from those left by the recovery team. Older, partially filled with sand. I photographed everything and took soil samples. Back at the station, I ran the tire track patterns through our database. They matched a common type of all-terrain tire, nothing distinctive. But the width between tracks suggested a pickup truck, not the white van Dacre had been driving. That evening, I visited Sophronia at the safe house where she'd been staying. She looked better than she had in months, the news of Dacre's death having lifted a visible weight from her shoulders. But when I told her about my concerns, her relief evaporated. "You think someone killed him?" she asked. "I think it's possible. The question is why, and who?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Officer Tsosi, there's something I didn't tell you before. About a week before Dacre's stalking became obvious, I had a strange encounter at the grocery store in Chinle. A woman approached me, said she knew I lived alone, offered to sell me a security system. When I declined, she got insistent, almost aggressive. Said I didn't know what kind of dangers were out there. Can you describe her?" Middle-aged, Native American, graying hair. She had this intensity about her, kept staring at me even after I walked away. I saw her again a few days later, just sitting in her car outside the school where I work. "Did you get her name?" She said it was Permelia Begay. The name wasn't familiar, but Begay was one of the most common surnames on the reservation. I ran it through our system and found 3 Permelia Begays in our jurisdiction. One was elderly and in a nursing home. One was a teenager, and the third was interesting. Permelia Begay, 54 years old, with a history of mental health issues and a connection that made my skin crawl. She was the mother of Lorraine Begay, a young woman who'd gone missing 6 years ago. Lorraine had been a teacher, like Sophronia. She'd lived alone, like Sophronia. She'd been 26 when she disappeared, close to Sophronia's age when the stalking started. I pulled Lorraine's missing person file. She'd vanished without a trace, no body ever found. The investigation had gone cold after a few months. But looking at her photo, I saw an unsettling resemblance to Sophronia. Same build, similar features, both with that gentle demeanor that seemed to attract predators. I tracked down Permelia's address, a trailer on the outskirts of Shiprock. When I arrived the next morning, the place looked abandoned. Weeds grew tall around the trailer, and mail overflowed from the box. But fresh tire tracks led to a shed behind the property. I announced myself and knocked. No answer. The door was unlocked, so I entered, hand on my weapon. The shed was a disturbing mirror of Dacre's shrine, but with a different focus. Photos covered one wall, but they were all of Lorraine Begay. The opposite wall held photos of Sophronia, with red string connecting them to Lorraine's pictures, as if Permelia was trying to draw parallels, find connections. On a workbench, I found something that made my blood run cold. Dacre's military ID, his wallet, and a bloodstained knife. "She was going to hurt her," a voice said behind me. I spun around to find Permelia standing in the doorway, holding a shotgun loosely at her side. She looked haggard, eyes sunken, clothes dirty and disheveled. "Put the weapon down, Permelia," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "He was going to take her, just like someone took my Lorraine," she continued, not seeming to hear me. I could see it in his eyes when I watched him watching her. Same look the one who took Lorraine had. "You killed Dacre?" "I saved her, Sophronia. I saved her from him." She smiled, a broken expression. I've been watching over her for months, making sure she was safe. Then he showed up, and I knew. I knew what he was. Permelia, I need you to put the shotgun down so we can talk about this. I followed him from that old trading post. He was planning something big, had supplies, rope, drugs. He was going to take her that night, so I stopped him. How? I waited until he was alone, checking one of his observation spots. Hit him with a tire iron, drove him to that canyon. He woke up at the edge, tried to fight, but I'm stronger than I look. She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. He begged at the end, said he loved her, would never hurt her, but they all say that. Who's they all, Permelia? The men who take women like our daughters, like my Lorraine, like Sophronia. Her grip on the shotgun tightened. But you were supposed to stop him. That's your job. Why didn't you stop him before I had to? We were trying. Not hard enough, she screamed, raising the shotgun slightly. Just like you didn't try hard enough to find Lorraine. 6 years and nothing. I had to watch another girl almost get taken because you people are useless. I saw her finger move to the trigger. Permelia, killing me won't bring Lorraine back. No, but it might save the next girl when you fail again. The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. Then, from behind Permelia, I heard Patricia's voice. Drop the weapon now! Permelia turned slightly, and I lunged forward, grabbing the shotgun barrel and pushing it up. It discharged into the ceiling, showering us with debris. Patricia rushed in, and together we subdued Permelia, who collapsed, sobbing about her lost daughter. As we waited for backup and EMTs, Permelia told us everything. She'd been watching Sophronia for over a year, convinced that whoever took Lorraine would come for her too. When Dacher appeared, she saw her chance for the justice she'd never gotten for her daughter. I found his little bunker before you did, she said. Saw all those photos, the journal. I knew what he was planning. The law wouldn't have stopped him in time. He was too smart, too careful. So I did what needed doing. Those other women in his photos, I asked. Did you recognize any of them? She nodded. 3 of them. All missing from around here over the past 5 years. He killed them, I'm sure of it. But you'll never find the bodies. He was careful about that. The investigation that followed revealed Permelia was likely right. Dacher had been linked through DNA evidence to at least 4 missing women across 3 states. But their bodies were never recovered, despite extensive searches based on Permelia's observations and Dacher's own notes. Permelia was charged with murder, but her lawyer built a strong case for mental illness brought on by grief and trauma. She'd been protecting Sophronia in her own twisted way, finishing what law enforcement couldn't. The jury was sympathetic. She was sentenced to psychiatric treatment rather than prison. Sophronia had mixed feelings about it all. She saved my life, she told me during one of our final meetings. But she also terrified me. Knowing someone was watching me to protect me feels almost as violating as knowing someone was watching me to hurt me. The case officially closed, but it left scars on everyone involved. My family remained nervous for months, my wife insisting on new locks, security cameras, a dog. The trust that had been broken, the sense of safety in our own homes, was slow to rebuild. But there was one more twist that came 6 months later. I was going through old missing persons files, cross-referencing them with Dacher's activities, when I found something odd. 3 of the women who'd disappeared had received strange visits before they vanished. A woman trying to sell them security systems, warning them about dangers. The descriptions varied, but the pattern was there. I dug deeper. Permelia had alibis for those times, solid ones. She'd been in psychiatric hold for one, visiting family out of state for another. It wasn't her, which meant there was another woman out there, following the same pattern, watching vulnerable women, warning them, possibly even selecting them for predators like nature. The thought was chilling, a symbiotic relationship between protector and predator, each feeding off the other's obsession. I brought this to the FBI, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The pattern was too vague, the connections too tenuous. They filed it away, said they'd keep an eye out. But I couldn't let it go. I started my own investigation, off the books. I found 7 more cases across the Southwest with the same pattern. A woman warning about danger, followed by a disappearance within a year. Different descriptions of the woman each time, but always the same approach, the same intensity. Late one night, going through these files at home, my phone rang. Unknown number. Officer Tsosi? The voice was female, older, carefully modulated. Who is this? Someone who appreciates your dedication, but you're looking in the wrong places. What do you mean? Permelia Begay killed a killer. She's a hero, even if the law doesn't see it that way, but she's not the only one who's noticed the patterns, who's trying to protect the vulnerable. Who are you? Someone who's been watching longer than you have. Someone who knows that sometimes, officer, the system fails. And when it does, someone else has to step in. Are you threatening? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just letting you know that your investigation is noticed and appreciated, but also unnecessary. The women who need protection are being protected. By whom? You? There was a long pause. Let me ask you something, officer. If you knew someone was going to hurt an innocent person and the law couldn't stop them, what would you do? I'd find a legal way to stop them. She laughed, a sad sound. That's what you have to say. But we both know the legal way doesn't always work. Dacher stalked Sophronia for months before you could do anything. How many women disappear while you're building your cases, gathering your evidence? That doesn't give anyone the right to... To what? To protect the innocent, to stop predators. The system you serve protects the guilty as often as the innocent. Due process, rights, lawyers, all things that help evil men escape justice. Who are you? I asked again. I'm nobody. I'm everybody. I'm the woman who walks you to your car at night. I'm the one who warns you about the danger you don't see coming. I'm the guardian you don't know you have. The line went dead. I tried to trace the call, but it came from a burner phone, already destroyed. I reported it to my superiors, but without a direct threat, there wasn't much to be done. The mysterious phone call haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something much larger than Dacher's stalking case or even Permelia's vigilante justice. There was a network out there, women watching and protecting, but also possibly enabling predators in some twisted ecosystem of hunter and guardian. I kept my investigation quiet, working on my own time. Patricia noticed my distraction and cornered me one evening at the station. What's going on, Nehemiah? You've been different since the Dacher case closed. I debated telling her, then decided I needed someone I could trust. I showed her my files, the patterns I'd found, the phone call I'd received. She studied the documents for a long time. This is bigger than just our jurisdiction. I know, but the FBI won't act without more evidence. Then we get more evidence. She looked at me steadily, but carefully. If this network exists, they're organized and they're watching. We started with Sophronia. She'd returned to teaching, moved to a new house closer to town. When I visited her, she seemed to be doing well, but there was still a wariness in her eyes. Sophronia, before Dacher started stalking you, did anyone else approach you? Maybe warning you about safety, offering protection? She thought for a moment. Actually, yes. About a month before I noticed the stalking, there was this woman at a gas station. She struck up a conversation, mentioned she'd seen me around, said a woman living alone needed to be careful. She gave me her card, said she installed security systems. Do you still have the card? She went to her desk, rummaged through a drawer. Here it is. Desert Shield Security. The woman's name was Janet Yazzie. Yazzie, my own surname, though common enough on the reservation. The coincidence made me uneasy. I took the card, noted the phone number. That evening, I called the number. It was disconnected. I searched for Desert Shield Security. No business registration, no online presence, nothing. The address on the card led to an empty lot in Farmington. Patricia ran Janet Yazzie through our database. We found 17 women with that name in the Four Corners area, but cross-referencing with age and the description Sophronia provided narrowed it to 3. One was deceased, one was in California, and the third lived in a remote area near Silay, about an hour from Chinle. No criminal record, no employment history for the past 10 years, but she'd previously worked as a counselor at a women's shelter in Phoenix. We decided to pay her a visit unofficially. The drive to Silay took us through some of the most isolated parts of the reservation. Janet Yazzie's property was 5 miles down a dirt road. A cluster of buildings including a main house, a barn, and several trailers. As we approached, I noticed security cameras mounted on posts, solar panels on every roof, and a sophisticated antenna array. This was no ordinary rural homestead. A woman emerged from the main house as we parked. Mid-40s, athletic build, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She matched Sophronia's description. "Officers," she said calmly, "I've been expecting you." "Miss Yazzie?" I asked. "That's one of my names. You're Officer Nehemiah Tsosi. We share a surname, though we're not related. And Officer Patricia Littlecrow. You both worked the Deicher case." "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know about people who protect women from predators, just as I make it my business to know about the predators themselves." She gestured toward the house. "Would you like to come in? I think it's time we talked." The inside of her house was part command center, part archive. Multiple computer monitors showed feeds from security cameras at various locations. File cabinets lined one wall, and a massive board covered another, with photos, newspaper clippings, and string connecting various elements, like a conspiracy theorist's dream, but organized with military precision. "What is all this?" Patricia asked. 20 years of work, Janet replied. Tracking predators, protecting potential victims, building a network of women who refuse to be statistics. "The woman who called me," I said. "Was that you?" "No, that was probably Martha. She's enthusiastic about recruitment. Thinks every cop should be part of the solution instead of the system." "How many of you are there?" "Enough. We're teachers, nurses, social workers, law enforcement, judges. Women in positions to see the patterns, to intervene when necessary." "Intervene how?" Janet's expression hardened. "Usually by warning potential victims, helping them disappear if necessary, providing protection the system won't. Sometimes by ensuring predators face consequences the law can't deliver." "Like Permelia did with Dacre?" "Permelia wasn't one of us, though we were aware of her. She was a mother, driven by grief, acting alone. We're more organized." "You're vigilantes," Patricia said flatly. "We're survivors," Janet corrected. "Every woman in our network has been touched by violence the system failed to prevent or punish. We decided to stop being victims and start being protectors." She pulled out a file, handed it to me. Inside were photos and documentation on Ichabod Dacre dating back 3 years. "We'd been tracking him since he killed a woman in Colorado," Janet explained. "The police there ruled it a suicide, but we knew better. We tried to warn his targets, but Sophronia, she was stubborn. Didn't want to believe she was in danger until it was almost too late." Why didn't you contact law enforcement? With what? Suspicions? Patterns only we could see because we'd been tracking him across state lines, outside official jurisdictions? You know how that would have gone. She had a point. Interagency cooperation was notoriously difficult, especially without concrete evidence. So, what now? I asked. You've revealed yourself to us. Because I need your help, Janet said. There's a new predator operating in the area. More sophisticated than nature, more dangerous. We've lost 3 women in the past 6 months, all fitting the same profile. Young, isolated, vulnerable. She showed us another file. 3 missing women, all from different parts of the reservation, but with disturbing similarities. All had received job offers that took them away from family. All had mentioned meeting someone special before disappearing. All had been warned by Janet's network, but hadn't heeded the warnings. We think he's posing as a contractor or employer, offering legitimate work to gain trust, Janet explained. But we can't find him. He's using technology to hide, encrypted communications, false identities, anonymous payments. This is a matter for the FBI, Patricia said. The FBI won't act without bodies, without evidence of federal crimes. By then, more women will be dead. Janet looked at us intently. But tribal police, investigating missing persons on the reservation, you have more latitude. She was right about that, too. Tribal law enforcement often had to be creative, working with limited resources and jurisdictional complexities. What are you asking us to do? I asked. Work with us. Officially, you investigate the missing women. Unofficially, we share information, resources. Together, we might be able to stop him before he takes another victim. I exchanged a look with Patricia. This was dangerous territory. Collaborating with vigilantes could end our careers, possibly land us in prison. But 3 women were missing, and if Janet was right, more would follow. We can't sanction illegal activities, I said carefully. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to use the information we provide to conduct legal investigations. What we do on our own time is our business. Over the next hour, Janet laid out what her network had discovered. The predator was using dating apps and job sites to identify targets. He offered positions with a fictional company called High Desert Enterprises, conducting video interviews that seemed legitimate. The women would travel to meet him for final interviews and training, then vanish. We've tried tracking the IP addresses, the payment methods, everything, Janet said. He's too careful, but we have one lead. A woman named Caroline So received an offer but was suspicious. She's willing to act as bait. Absolutely not, I said immediately. We can't use civilians as bait. She's not a civilian. She's one of us. Former military intelligence, trained in self-defense and highly motivated. Her younger sister was one of Dature's victims. The ethical implications made my head spin. But before I could respond, my phone rang. It was dispatch. Another woman had been reported missing. Emma Begay, 25, last seen leaving for a job interview in Farmington. That's 4, Janet said grimly. How many more before you act? I made a decision that would haunt me. Tell me more about Caroline's plan. Caroline So arrived an hour later. She was nothing like what I expected. Petite, young-looking, despite being 32, with an easy smile that concealed sharp intelligence. She showed us the correspondence with High Desert Enterprises. I've slow-played them, she explained. Expressed interest, but asked lots of questions. They're eager. I fit their victim profile perfectly. Young, Native American, isolated, financially struggling. This is too dangerous, Patricia protested. More dangerous than letting him take another woman who isn't prepared? Caroline countered. I know what I'm getting into. Those missing women didn't. The plan she outlined was sophisticated. She would agree to the final interview, but we'd be tracking her every move. GPS devices, hidden cameras, backup teams at strategic locations. The goal was to identify the predator and follow him back to where he was holding the women, because Janet believed they were still alive, being held somewhere. He's taking too many too quickly to be killing them immediately, she reasoned. He's collecting them for something. The thought made my skin crawl, but if there was a chance the women were alive, I need to run this by my superiors, I said. No, Janet said firmly. The moment this goes up the chain, it gets complicated. Politics, jurisdiction, bureaucracy. Women will die while everyone argues about protocol. She was probably right, but it went against everything I'd been trained to do. Yet, looking at the photos of the missing women, thinking about Sophronia's terror, Permelia's grief over her daughter. 48 hours, I said. We try it your way for 48 hours. If we don't find them, we bring in the FBI, tell them everything. Janet nodded. Caroline smiled, a predatory expression that reminded me she wasn't the victim here. She was the hunter. We spent the next day preparing. Patricia and I requisitioned equipment under the guise of a routine investigation. Caroline continued her correspondence with High Desert Enterprises, finally agreeing to meet for the final interview at a hotel in Farmington. The night before the operation, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong, about my responsibility if Caroline got hurt or worse. Rebecca knew something was bothering me, but I couldn't tell her, couldn't implicate her in what might be a career-ending decision. The next morning, as we prepared to deploy, Janet pulled me aside. Whatever happens today, Officer Tsosi, know that you're doing the right thing. The system isn't broken. It was never designed to protect women like us in the first place. Sometimes we have to protect ourselves. And if this goes wrong, then at least we tried. That's more than most do. As Caroline's car pulled away, heading to her meeting with the predator, I prayed I hadn't just signed her death warrant. The tracking devices showed her location clearly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something bigger than we understood. Caroline's GPS signal moved steadily toward Farmington, each blip on the tracking monitor making my heart race faster. Patricia and I followed at a distance in an unmarked vehicle, while Janet coordinated with her network from a mobile command post, a converted RV parked at a truck stop. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. at the Courtyard Hotel downtown. Caroline had hidden cameras in her jacket buttons and a recording device in her purse. We had officers in civilian clothes positioned at strategic points, though they didn't know the full scope of the operation. At 1:47 p.m., Caroline parked and walked into the hotel lobby. Through her hidden camera feed, we watched her approach the front desk. "I'm here for an interview with High Desert Enterprises," she said. The clerk checked his computer. "Yes, Ms. Tso. Conference room B, down the hall to your left." My instincts screamed that something was wrong. Real companies didn't conduct final interviews in random hotel conference rooms. But Caroline walked confidently down the hallway, her camera showing sterile walls and industrial carpet. She knocked on conference room B. "Come in," a male voice called. The man waiting inside was unremarkable. Mid-40s, average height, business casual clothes. He could have been any middle manager in any company. That's what made him perfect for this kind of predation. "Ms. Tso, pleasure to meet you. I'm Robert Anderson from High Desert." They shook hands. Caroline sat down, playing the part of an eager job applicant perfectly. For 20 minutes, it seemed like a legitimate interview. Anderson asked about her experience, her goals, her availability to travel. Then he offered her water from a sealed bottle. Caroline accepted, pretending to drink while actually just wetting her lips. Within minutes, she began acting drowsy. "I'm sorry," she slurred. "I suddenly feel it's altitude adjustment," Anderson said smoothly. "Happens to everyone. Why don't you rest for a moment?" Caroline slumped in her chair, apparently unconscious. Anderson immediately dropped his professional demeanor. He made a phone call. "Package secured. Bringing her to the site now." He lifted Caroline, who was doing an incredible job playing unconscious, and carried her out through a rear exit we hadn't known about. By the time we reached the back of the hotel, he was loading her into a white panel van. "All units, do not intercept," I radioed. "We need to know where he's taking her." Following the van without being noticed through Farmington traffic was nerve-wracking. Anderson drove carefully, obeying all traffic laws, just another delivery van making rounds. He headed north, then east into increasingly rural territory. Patricia checked the GPS. He's heading toward the beastly Badlands. The Badlands. Thousands of acres of twisted rock formations and hidden canyons. Perfect for hiding victims. Terrible for rescue operations. After an hour of driving, the van turned onto a dirt road that didn't appear on any of our maps. We had to fall back further to avoid detection, relying entirely on Caroline's GPS signal. The signal stopped moving at coordinates that showed nothing but empty desert on satellite images. We parked a mile away and approached on foot, using rock formations for cover. What we found defied belief. Hidden in a natural depression, invisible from more than 100 yards away, was a complex of shipping containers arranged to form a compound. Solar panels and satellite dishes on top, generators humming softly. This had been here for years without anyone knowing. Through binoculars, I watched Anderson carry Caroline into one of the containers. I counted 3 other men moving around the compound, all armed. This wasn't a one-man operation. "We need backup," Patricia whispered. "FBI, state police, everyone." But as I reached for my radio, movement caught my eye. Women. Through the small windows of one container, I could see women. They were alive. "Janet was right," I breathed. "He's collecting them." We watched for another hour, gathering intelligence. The compound had at least 6 containers converted into living spaces, a central command unit, and what looked like a medical facility. This wasn't just kidnapping. It was trafficking on a massive scale. Caroline's camera came back online briefly, showing the interior of a container converted into a cell. 3 women were already inside, including Emma Begay, the most recent victim. They were alive but drugged, chained to the walls. Then the feed cut out. Either the camera was discovered or damaged. "We go in now," I decided. "That's suicide," Patricia protested. 4 armed men, fortified position. Caroline's in there. Those women are in there. Every minute we wait, a gunshot cut me off. Then another, screaming from the compound. We rushed forward, calling for backup as we ran. The compound erupted in chaos. Through the dust and confusion, I saw Caroline, very much conscious and armed, fighting with one of the guards. She'd somehow gotten free and turned the tables, but she was outnumbered. Anderson emerged from a container with a rifle. I drew my weapon, shouting for him to drop his. He turned toward me, raising the rifle, and I fired. 3 shots center mass. He went down. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. Gunfire, screaming, dust, and blood. Patricia took down another guard who was trying to execute the prisoners. Caroline, despite being drugged, managed to disarm another. The 4th tried to flee but ran straight into Janet's team, who'd been positioned as outer perimeter security. When the dust settled, we had 4 suspects in custody, 1 wounded, 8 women rescued, and evidence of a trafficking ring that extended across 3 states. The FBI response was massive and immediate. The compound was processed as a crime scene, revealing years of horrific activities. The rescued women were all alive, though traumatized and requiring immediate medical attention. Emma Begay would later testify that they'd been told they were being trained for overseas work, kept drugged and compliant while buyers were arranged. Caroline had several broken ribs and a concussion, but was otherwise okay. The water Anderson had given her was indeed drugged, but Janet's network had prepared for that. Caroline had taken counteracting agents beforehand and was trained to fake unconsciousness. "You could have died," I told her later at the hospital. "But I didn't, and neither did they." She gestured toward the room where the rescued women were being treated. That's what matters. The investigation revealed that Robert Anderson was actually Josiah Coldwell, no relation to the construction killer, just an unfortunate coincidence of surnames. He'd been running the trafficking ring for 7 years, using the isolation of the reservation and jurisdictional confusion to avoid detection. But the most disturbing revelation came from his computer records. He had a client list, buyers from around the world who specifically requested Native American women. The fetishization and commodification of our people turned my stomach. Even worse were the notes about breeding programs and preservation of bloodlines that spoke to a sick fascination with racial purity. Patricia and I were both disciplined for conducting an unauthorized operation, though the successful rescue mitigated the consequences. We received written reprimands but kept our jobs. The FBI took credit for the bust, which was fine by us. The women were safe. That's what mattered. Janet's network dissolved back into the shadows after the operation. Officially, they were never there. The FBI investigation found no evidence of their involvement, just a lucky break from good police work. Sophronia sent me a letter months later. She'd moved to Phoenix, was teaching at a private school, had met someone. She was healing. She thanked me for everything, but said she never wanted to think about that time again. I understood. Permelia Begay died in the psychiatric facility 6 months after the compound raid. The official cause was heart failure, but I think it was heartbreak. Even knowing we'd saved 8 women couldn't heal the wound of losing her daughter. The trials took 2 years. Josiah Coldwell and his associates all received life sentences for kidnapping, human trafficking, and attempted murder. The client list led to arrests in 12 countries. It was hailed as a major victory for law enforcement. But I knew the truth. We'd won because a network of women, operating outside the law, had done what the system couldn't or wouldn't do. They'd connected dots across jurisdictions, identified patterns authorities missed, and ultimately risked their lives to save others. I still get calls sometimes. Unknown numbers, female voices, tips about suspicious activity, missing women who haven't been reported yet, predators who've slipped through legal cracks. I investigate every one. Patricia knows. She gets the same calls. We don't talk about it, but we both understand. The system we serve has gaps, blind spots, failures. Sometimes, those who operate in the shadows are the only light in the darkness. Caroline Zoe disappeared after the trials. Janet Yazzie property was found abandoned. The network scattered, reformed, evolved. They're still out there, watching, protecting, doing what needs to be done. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving the empty highways of the reservation, I think about them. These guardian angels with dirty hands, these protectors who've crossed lines I can't cross. I should condemn them, but I can't. Not when I've seen what happens when they're not there. The official report says the trafficking ring was discovered through diligent police work and interagency cooperation. It's a good story, the kind that makes people feel safe, that reinforces faith in the system. But I know the truth. And the truth is that sometimes the predators aren't the only ones hunting in the darkness. Sometimes there are others out there, watching from the shadows, ready to strike when the law fails. I've made my peace with it. Every woman saved, every predator stopped, Every family that doesn't have to grieve. That's worth more than procedural purity. My phone rings. Unknown number, I answer. Officer Tsosi? There's something you need to know. I grab my keys and head into the night. Because that's what we do. We answer the call, follow the leads, save who we can. And sometimes, just sometimes, we work with angels who've learned to fight dirty. The desert is vast, full of secrets and shadows. But not all shadows hide monsters. Some hide guardians, and in the end that might be what keeps us safe. The first call came on a Monday morning in April 2024. I was just starting my shift at the Navajo Tribal Police Station in Tuba City when dispatch forwarded a concerning report from the Indian Health Service clinic. 3 families from the same area near Black Mesa had brought in sick children over the weekend, all with similar symptoms. Severe nausea, tremors, and neurological issues that the doctors couldn't immediately explain. My name is Officer Zebulon Bagay, and I'd been investigating environmental crimes on the reservation for the past 6 years. Most cases involved illegal dumping or poaching, straightforward violations with clear perpetrators. But something about this felt different from the moment I heard about it. Dr. Priscilla Yazzie, the chief physician at the clinic, met me in her office that afternoon. She was a woman in her 50s who'd grown up on the reservation and returned after medical school to serve her people. The concern in her eyes was evident as she spread out the medical charts. 17 patients so far, she said, her voice tight with controlled anxiety. All from the same general area, about a 5-mile radius around Rough Rock. Ages ranging from 4 to 73. Same symptom progression in each case. Environmental contamination, I suggested, already mentally cataloging the possible sources in that area. That's what we thought initially, heavy metal poisoning, perhaps from old mining operations. But the blood tests, she pulled up results on her computer. The toxicology is all wrong. This isn't lead, arsenic, or any of the usual suspects from mining contamination. It's something else. Something we can't identify. How serious is it? Dr. Yazzie's expression darkened. 3 patients are in critical condition. 1, a 68-year-old grandmother named Theophila Tsosi, is on life support. If we don't figure out what's causing this soon, people are going to start dying. I drove out to Rough Rock that evening, the setting sun painting the desert in shades of orange and red. It was a scattered community, mostly traditional hogans and modest homes spread across the harsh landscape. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where families had lived for generations. My first stop was the Tsosi residence, where Theophila had lived with her daughter's family. The house was empty. Everyone was at the hospital. But I surveyed the property. Their water came from a well, common in this area. They had a small garden, some chickens, nothing unusual for a rural reservation home. I collected water samples from their well and soil samples from various points on the property. Then I visited the other affected families, finding similar setups: wells, gardens, livestock. The common denominator seemed obvious: the water supply. But when I had the water tested at our environmental lab, the results came back clean. No industrial chemicals, no heavy metals, no bacterial contamination. Whatever was making people sick, it wasn't in their wells. By Wednesday, the number of sick had risen to 31. The Indian Health Service was overwhelmed, transferring the most serious cases to Flagstaff Medical Center. Media attention was starting to build, with reporters asking about potential terrorism or industrial accidents. That's when I got an unexpected visitor at the station, a man named Archibald Benally, who said he worked for a water testing company called Pure Desert Solutions. He was in his 40s, well-dressed for someone in his line of work, with an unsettling intensity about him. "Officer Begay," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk without invitation. I heard about the situation in Rough Rock. My company would like to offer our services free of charge. We have advanced testing equipment that might detect contaminants your lab missed. Something about him set off my instincts. That's generous of you, Mr. Benally. How did you hear about this? We haven't made any public statements yet. He smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. I have contacts at the hospital. When something like this happens, word spreads quickly in our industry. Water contamination is serious business. And what exactly is your business? Water purification systems. We install filtration units for homes and businesses across the reservation. In fact, we've been trying to get contracts in the Rough Rock area for months. The situation, tragic as it is, demonstrates why our services are needed. The opportunistic tone made my skin crawl. People were dying, and he was seeing dollar signs. But I couldn't deny that we needed all the help we could get. Leave your contact information, I told him. I'll discuss it with my superiors. He left a business card and departed, but not before making one more comment. You know, officer, sometimes the most dangerous contaminants are the ones that occur naturally. The desert has many secrets. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Benally's words, about natural contaminants. The reservation had a long history of uranium mining, coal extraction, various industrial projects that had left scars on the land. But we'd tested for all of that. At 3 a.m., my phone rang. It was Dr. Yazzie. Zebulon, you need to come to the hospital immediately. Theophilus Sosi is conscious, and she's asking for police. She says she knows what's making everyone sick. I rushed to Flagstaff, arriving just as the sun was rising. Theophila was weak but alert, her daughter holding her hand. When she saw me, she beckoned me closer, her voice barely a whisper. The blessing ceremony, she said. 2 months ago, a man came, said he was a traditional healer, did a blessing for good harvest. What man? I asked, leaning closer. Called himself a medicine man. But something was wrong. The herbs he burned, the water he blessed, it smelled wrong, made my eyes water. She coughed, specks of blood on her lips. He gave us all tea to drink, said it would protect us from evil spirits. What was his name? Joseph Nez. But he wasn't from here. His accent was wrong, city accent. Can you describe him? But before she could answer, alarms started blaring. Theophila's body convulsed, her eyes rolling back. Medical staff pushed me aside as they worked to stabilize her. Her daughter was screaming, other family members crying. Dr. Yazzie pulled me into the hallway. She's going into organ failure. Whatever this toxin is, it's accelerating. She mentioned a blessing ceremony, someone giving them tea, I said quickly. Joseph Nez claimed to be a medicine man. Dr. Yazzie's face paled. If someone deliberately poisoned them under the guise of traditional medicine, that's not just assault, that's an attack on our entire culture. I spent the next day tracking down Joseph Nez. No one in the traditional healer community had heard of him. The name didn't appear in any of our databases, but when I showed Theophila's daughter a photo lineup of various suspects, she pointed to one immediately. It was Archibald Benally, the same man who'd offered to help test the water, the same man whose company stood to profit from water contamination fears. He'd used a false identity to infiltrate the community, conducting his blessing ceremony to poison residents, creating a crisis he could then solve with his expensive filtration systems. But when I went to arrest him, Archibald Benally had vanished. Pure Desert Solutions was a shell company with a fake address. The phone numbers went to burner phones, now disconnected. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. We finally identified the poison with the help of a CDC toxicologist. a synthetic compound similar to certain mushroom toxins but modified to be slower acting and harder to detect. It was ingenious in its cruelty, designed to create maximum suffering and fear while remaining almost impossible to trace. The treatment protocol was established, but the damage was done. 47 people had been poisoned. 3 died, including Theophila Sosi, who never woke up after that last conversation with me. The community was traumatized, trust in traditional ceremonies shattered. The investigation revealed that Benally, not his real name, we discovered, had done this before. Similar poisoning clusters in indigenous communities in New Mexico and Colorado, always followed by water purification companies offering solutions. He'd made millions selling fear, targeting the most vulnerable populations who already had reasons to distrust government and outsider help. We tracked his financial trails to offshore accounts, his supplies to chemical companies in Mexico, his movements through security footage and credit card records. The FBI joined the hunt. Interpol was notified. But he'd had a 2-day head start and years of experience disappearing. 3 weeks after Theophila's death, I got a call from a blocked number. "Officer Bagay?" The voice was familiar. Archibald Benally, or whoever he really was. "I heard you've been looking for me." "Where are you?" I demanded, signaling frantically to Patricia to trace the call. "Far from your jurisdiction, I assure you. I'm calling to deliver a message. What happened in Rough Rock was business, nothing personal. Your people have resources, land, water, federal funding. Someone's going to exploit that. It might as well be someone who does it cleanly. You murdered 3 people. I provided a service. Fear is a powerful motivator for sales. Those who died were already weak, already dying. I just accelerated the inevitable. You're a monster." He laughed. "I'm a businessman, and business is good. Do you know how many reservations there are across the Americas? How many indigenous communities with valuable resources and vulnerable populations? Your investigation has barely scratched the surface. We'll find you. No, you won't. Because I'm very good at this. And because the system you serve doesn't actually care about indigenous peoples. Oh, they'll make a show of investigating, but when the media attention dies down, so will the resources. Meanwhile, I'll be in another community, with another name, another crisis to create and solve." The line went dead. The trace led to a payphone in Juarez, Mexico. But by the time Mexican authorities arrived, he was long gone. I continued investigating, building a profile of his operations. He had partners, I discovered, a network of people who helped him identify targets, create identities, move money. The conspiracy ran deep, with connections to legitimate businesses, corrupt officials, even some people within law enforcement who were paid to look the other way. But every lead turned cold. Every witness disappeared or recanted. Every piece of physical evidence led to dead ends. It was like fighting smoke. The moment you thought you had something solid, it dissipated. 6 months after the Rough Rock poisonings, I was working late at the station when I noticed something wrong. My coffee tasted off, bitter in a way that was familiar but I couldn't place. Then the tremors started in my hands. I'd been poisoned. I managed to call for help before the seizures began. Patricia found me on the office floor, convulsing, foam at my mouth. The rush to the hospital was a blur of sirens and voices. Dr. Yazzie was there, pumping me full of the antidotes we'd developed for the Rough Rock victims. I survived, but barely. 3 days in intensive care, 2 weeks in recovery. The dose had been carefully measured, enough to incapacitate, not enough to kill quickly. A message. There was no evidence of how the poison had been administered. The coffee pot tested clean, as did everything else in the office. Security footage showed nothing unusual. It was as if the poison had materialized from thin air. But I knew better. Benelli or one of his network had gotten to me, probably through someone I trusted. The message was clear. Back off, or next time the dose would be lethal. The poisoning changed everything. I was no longer just investigating a case. I was a target, a victim, living evidence that Archibald Benelli could reach anyone, anywhere. The FBI offered me protective custody, but I refused. Running would mean abandoning the communities still at risk, and I couldn't live with that. Dr. Priscilla Yazzie insisted on daily blood tests for me, monitoring for any residual effects of the poison. During one of these appointments, 3 weeks after my poisoning, she pulled me aside with a disturbing discovery. "Zebulon, I've been analyzing your blood samples against those from Rough Rock," she said, pulling up data on her computer. "The compound used on you was different, more refined. It's like he's been perfecting the formula." Perfecting it for what? Mass distribution. The original poison required direct ingestion, the tea at the blessing ceremony. But this new version, she showed me molecular diagrams I couldn't fully understand. This could be aerosolized, added to water supplies at treatment plants, even absorbed through skin contact. He's not just poisoning individuals anymore. He's preparing for something bigger. The implications were terrifying. Every water source on the reservation became suspect. We issued advisories, but how do you tell an entire population not to trust their water without causing mass panic? And that, I realized, was exactly what Benelli wanted. Fear so widespread that people would pay anything for his protection. I decided to approach the investigation differently. Instead of chasing Benelli directly, I'd target his network. Someone had helped him poison me inside a police station. Someone was providing him with chemical supplies. Someone was laundering his money. Find the network. Find the man. My first lead came from an unexpected source. Theophila Sosi's daughter, Marie. She'd been going through her mother's belongings when she found something odd. A business card for Pure Desert Solutions, but dated from 2 years before the poisoning, long before Benelli supposedly arrived in the area. "Mom never mentioned this," Marie said, handing me the card. "But look at the back." Written in Theophila's shaky handwriting was a note. Man came by asking about water rights. Something not right about him, keeping this just in case. Theophila had sensed danger 2 years ago. How long had Benelli been planning this? How many communities had he surveilled, studied, selected for victimization? I dug deeper into land and water records for the Rough Rock area. That's when I found it. A series of shell companies had been quietly buying water rights near the reservation for the past 5 years. Small purchases, nothing that would raise flags individually, but collectively they represented control over significant water resources upstream from tribal lands. The companies all traced back to a holdings corporation in Delaware, which led to another in Nevada, then offshore to the Caymans. It was a deliberately complex web, but I'd seen this pattern before in money laundering cases. Someone was playing a long game, and the poisonings were just one piece of a larger scheme. Late one night, while reviewing financial documents at home, I heard something outside. My hand went to my service weapon as I peered through the window. A figure in dark clothing was near my vehicle. I called for backup and moved to confront them, but they fled into the desert darkness before I could get close. My truck wouldn't start the next morning. The mechanic found sugar in the gas tank. Amateur sabotage, almost childish. But that was the point. It wasn't meant to harm me, just to let me know they were watching, could reach me any time. Patricia assigned herself as my unofficial bodyguard after that, insisting on driving me to interviews and staying close during investigations. It was during one of these joint interviews that we got our next break. We were talking to a chemical supply company in Flagstaff that had reported suspicious purchases. someone buying large quantities of organic synthesis precursors, the kind used to create complex toxins. The manager, an elderly man named Frank, mentioned something interesting. The buyer always paid cash, always wore sunglasses and a hat, never gave a real name. But I remembered him because he had this nervous habit, kept clicking his pen while he waited. Click, 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 constantly. Drove me crazy. That detail triggered something in Patricia's memory. The water rights office in Window Rock. When we were investigating the shell companies, the clerk mentioned someone with the same habit. Said a man came in asking about water rights, clicking his pen the whole time. We had a pattern, a behavior that linked different locations. It wasn't much, but it was something. We started canvassing every business that might sell chemicals, lab equipment, or water testing supplies, asking about customers with that specific nervous habit. It took weeks, but we finally got a hit. A medical supply company in Albuquerque had security footage of a man matching our description, pen clicking and all. The quality wasn't great, but facial recognition suggested a possible match to someone in the federal database. Marcus Whitehorse, a former EPA inspector who'd been fired 5 years ago for accepting bribes from mining companies. Whitehorse had the perfect background for Benally's operation. Knowledge of water systems, environmental regulations, and how to exploit both. His last known address was in Phoenix, but when Phoenix PD checked, he'd moved out months ago, leaving no forwarding address. But we knew his habits now. The pen clicking was a tell, a nervous tic he couldn't control. We distributed his photo to law enforcement across the Southwest, noting the behavioral marker. It was a long shot, but sometimes that's all you have. 2 weeks later, we got a call from a tribal officer in the White Mountain Apache Reservation. A man matching Whitehorse's description had been seen at a local motel, and yes, he'd been clicking a pen at the front desk. By the time we arrived, he was gone, but he'd left something behind, a laptop hidden in the ceiling tiles, probably forgotten in his haste to leave. The laptop was encrypted, but our cybercrime unit eventually cracked it. What we found was a goldmine of horror. Detailed plans for poisoning water supplies across a dozen reservations. Chemical formulas, distribution methods, timing schedules. Financial records showing payments from multiple sources, including some names that made my blood run cold. Legitimate corporations that stood to benefit from tribal land becoming uninhabitable. There were also communications with Benally, though he used various aliases. The emails revealed the true scope of their plan. They weren't just trying to sell water purification systems. They were part of a larger conspiracy to force indigenous peoples off resource-rich lands through systematic poisoning, making the areas seem contaminated and dangerous, driving down property values so shell companies could buy them cheap. One email particularly stood out. Phase 3 implementation ready for Black Mesa. Once population displacement reaches 60%, initiate buyout offers through subsidiary companies. Estimated profit from mineral rights alone, $500. Remember, the fear is more valuable than the actual contamination. Make them believe nowhere is safe. Black Mesa. My jurisdiction. They were coming back to finish what they'd started in Rough Rock. I immediately contacted Dr. Yazzie to warn the clinic, then called an emergency meeting with tribal leadership. We needed to act fast, but carefully. If we moved too openly, Benally and his network would disappear again. But if we waited too long, more people would die. The tribal council authorized a covert operation. We'd monitor all water sources around Black Mesa, install hidden cameras at key locations, and have rapid response teams ready. But we'd do it quietly, making it appear that we'd given up the investigation, that the threat had passed. It was a waiting game, and waiting was torture. Every day that passed without incident made me more nervous. Were they watching? Had they detected our surveillance? Or were they planning something we hadn't anticipated? The answer came 3 weeks later, at 2 a.m. on a moonless night. Motion sensors at the Rough Rock water treatment facility triggered silent alarms. Our cameras showed 2 figures in hazmat suits approaching the main intake valve with large containers. We moved in fast and silent. Patricia led one team from the north while I approached from the south. The figures were so focused on their task they didn't notice us until we were almost on top of them. "Freeze! Tribal police!" One figure dropped his container and raised his hands. The other tried to run, but tripped over his own hazmat suit, falling hard. We had them. But when we removed their masks, neither was Benally or Whitehorse. They were hired thugs, low-level criminals paid to do the dirty work. They knew nothing beyond their immediate instructions. Poison the water, get paid, disappear. The containers held enough concentrated toxin to contaminate the entire water supply for 50,000 people. The death toll would have been catastrophic. We'd stopped a massacre, but the masterminds were still free. Frustrated, I was examining the captured equipment when I noticed something. A partial fingerprint on one of the containers, preserved in a chemical residue. It was barely visible, but our lab enhanced it enough to run through the database. Match Archibald Benally. But not the Archibald Benally we'd been chasing. This was Archibald Benally Sr., age 71, a retired chemistry professor living in a nursing home in Tucson. The man we'd been hunting was his son, Archibald Jr., who'd legally changed his name to Adam Bishop 5 years ago. We finally had his real identity. Adam Bishop had a documented history, PhD in chemistry, worked for several pharmaceutical companies before being fired for conducting unauthorized experiments. He'd been brilliant but unstable, convinced that modern society was too soft, that humanity needed culling to remain strong. Classic delusions of grandeur mixed with sociopathic tendencies. His credit cards, when we finally got warrants for them, showed he'd been in Phoenix just 3 days ago. The trail was warm. Federal marshals raided his last known location, a luxury apartment downtown, but found it stripped clean. He'd been tipped off again. That night, exhausted and defeated, I went home to find an envelope under my door. Inside was a single photo. Me, Patricia, Dr. Yazzie, and several other key investigators taken with a telephoto lens. On the back, "You're becoming annoying. This is your final warning." Patricia wanted to pull back, regroup, hand everything to the FBI, but I couldn't. Every day Bishop remained free, more people were at risk, and now I had another lead from the nursing home. Bishop had been visiting his father monthly until 6 months ago, when the visits abruptly stopped. I went to see Archibald Sr. myself. He was frail, suffering from dementia, but he had moments of clarity. When I mentioned his son, his eyes focused sharply. "Adam was always special," he said, his voice thin but clear. "Too smart for his own good. I taught him chemistry, you know. Wanted him to help people, cure diseases, but he became obsessed with purification. Purification of the human race. Started in college, reading about eugenics, social Darwinism. Said the weak were dragging down the strong. I tried to talk sense into him, but..." He shook his head sadly. He said I was part of the problem. Haven't seen him since he told me about his great project. Did he say what this project was? Controlled depopulation. Starting with what he called expendable populations. Indigenous peoples, the poor, the sick. He had maps, charts, showing how to maximize impact while minimizing detection. Tears ran down the old man's cheeks. "I created a monster. I taught him everything he knows about chemistry, and he's using it to kill." The old man grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "There's something else. Adam has a partner, someone high up in government or business. He accidentally mentioned it once. said his sponsor had provided everything he needed. I don't know who, but they're powerful enough to protect him. Warn him when you get close. A sponsor, someone in position of authority, feeding Bishop information, funding his operation. That's how he always stayed one step ahead. The conspiracy went deeper than we'd imagined. I left the nursing home with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain. We had a mole. Someone inside law enforcement or government who was protecting Bishop. Every move we made was being reported to him. That's when I decided to go dark. I told Patricia I was taking medical leave, still recovering from the poisoning. I told my superiors the case was stalled, that I was handing everything to the FBI. Then I disappeared into the investigation, working alone, trusting no one. Working alone changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. I told no one where I was going, filed no reports, made no official requests. I became a ghost in my own case, operating from a motel room paid for with cash, using burner phones following leads that I shared with no one. My first move was to analyze the pattern of leaks. Every time we'd gotten close to Bishop, he'd been warned within hours. But not every operation had been compromised. Smaller actions, ones involving only Patricia and myself, had sometimes succeeded. The mole was someone with high-level access, but not omniscient. Someone who received reports, but wasn't in the field. I made a list of everyone who'd had access to operational details. FBI agents, tribal police brass, federal prosecutors, even administrative staff. 47 names. I needed to narrow it down. Working backward from each leaked operation, I tracked who had been informed and when. Meeting logs, email chains, phone records. I pulled everything I could access without raising suspicions. A pattern emerged. Every compromised operation had been discussed in the joint task force meetings held every Tuesday at the federal building in Phoenix. 12 people attended those meetings regularly. One of them was feeding information to Bishop. I decided to set a trap. I created false intelligence about Bishop's location, different versions with small variations, and leaked each version to a different person on my suspect list. Then I waited to see which location Bishop would flee from. The call came 3 days later from the Yavapai County Sheriff's Department. Someone matching Bishop's description had hastily left a cabin near Prescott. The exact location I'd shared with Deputy Director Harold Morrison of the Arizona State Police, a man who'd been instrumental in coordinating multi-agency responses to the poisonings. Morrison. I'd worked with him for 2 years, trusted him, shared information that had probably gotten people killed. The betrayal was a physical pain in my chest, but I needed proof, not just circumstantial evidence. I started surveillance on Morrison, following him during off hours, monitoring his communications as much as I legally could without a warrant. For 2 weeks, nothing. He went to work, went home to his family, attended his daughter's soccer games. Normal life. Then, on a Friday night, he deviated. Instead of going home, he drove to an industrial area in South Phoenix, parked outside a warehouse, and waited. 20 minutes later, another car arrived. Through binoculars, I watched Adam Bishop get out and approach Morrison's vehicle. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see Morrison hand Bishop an envelope. Bishop examined the contents, looked like documents, then gave Morrison something in return, a small vial. They talked for another 5 minutes before Bishop returned to his car. I had a choice: follow Bishop and try to arrest him alone, or follow Morrison and find out what was in that vial. I chose Morrison, knowing I might be letting Bishop escape again, but needing to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. Morrison drove home, normal as ever. But that night, his teenage daughter became violently ill. By morning, she was in the hospital with symptoms eerily similar to the Rough Rock victims. Morrison played the concerned father perfectly. but I knew the truth. He'd poisoned his own daughter. Why? It took me another day of investigation to understand. Morrison was deeply in debt. His daughter needed expensive cancer treatments not covered by insurance. Bishop had offered him a deal: information for money, plus the antidote for any poisonings that might affect his family. But the antidote only worked if you kept taking it. Morrison had made his daughter sick to maintain his cover as a victim, not a perpetrator. The depravity of it, poisoning his own child for money, made me physically ill. But it also gave me leverage. Morrison's daughter was getting sicker. He'd need another dose of antidote soon, and Bishop was the only source. I confronted Morrison that night in the hospital parking garage. He was walking to his car when I stepped from the shadows, weapon drawn. "Hello, Harold." He froze, his hand moving toward his own weapon. "Don't," I warned. "I know everything. Bishop, the payments, the leaked information. I even know about the vial he gave you." His shoulders sagged. "Zebulon, I can explain. You poisoned your own daughter." "To save her," he exploded. "The cancer treatments cost $300,000. Insurance covered nothing. She was dying anyway. Bishop offered me a way to save her. By killing other people's children?" I didn't know about the poisonings at first. He said he was a businessman, that he just needed information about water rights, environmental regulations. By the time I understood, I was in too deep. He had evidence of the bribes. If I stopped helping him, he'd destroy me, and Sarah would die without treatment. "Where is he, Harold?" "I don't know. He contacts me, never the other way round." "You're lying." "I'm not. He's paranoid, never stays in one place long, but..." Morrison hesitated, conflict clear on his face. "There's a meeting tomorrow night. He wants the task force's latest intelligence. Midnight at the old Hayden flour mill in Tempe." The flour mill had been abandoned for decades. A massive industrial complex perfect for clandestine meetings. It was also perfect for an ambush. "You're going to keep that meeting," I told Morrison. "And you're going to be wearing a wire. He'll kill me if he suspects anything. Your daughter is dying, Harold. The only way she gets the real antidote is if we catch Bishop. Otherwise, she'll need his doses forever, and one day he'll decide you're not useful anymore." Morrison's face crumbled. He knew I was right. We had one day to prepare. I couldn't involve official channels. There might be other moles, and Morrison didn't know the full network. So I turned to the only people I absolutely trusted: Patricia and Dr. Priscilla Yazzie. Patricia was furious when I told her what I'd been doing. "You could have been killed working alone like that. I couldn't risk another leak. You couldn't trust me?" "I couldn't risk you. There's a difference." Dr. Yazzie was more practical. "If we're going to capture Bishop, we need to be prepared for biological threats. He won't go down without using his poisons." She prepared antidote injectors, hazmat gear, and field treatment kits. Patricia gathered tactical equipment and planned entry routes to the flour mill. I worked with Morrison on his cover story, drilling him on what to say, how to act natural despite wearing recording equipment. The night of the meeting, the abandoned flour mill loomed against the sky like a decaying giant. Morrison parked where he always did, in the shadow of a collapsed loading dock. Patricia and I were positioned 50 yards away, watching through night vision scopes. Morrison waited in his car, visibly nervous even from a distance. At 12:03 a.m., a figure emerged from the ruins of the mill. Bishop, moving with the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Through Morrison's wire, we heard their conversation. "You're sweating, Harold. Problems?" "My daughter's getting worse. I need more antidote. After you tell me about the investigation. What does Begay know?" "He's given up, handed everything to the FBI. He's on medical leave, probably permanent." The poisoning affected his nervous system. Good. And the water treatment facilities? Security has been increased, but only for another week. Budget constraints. Bishop laughed. Perfect. In 2 weeks, we implement Phase 4. 20 facilities, simultaneous contamination. The reservation will be uninhabitable within a month. 20 facilities? That's genocide. It's business. The land holds trillions in rare earth minerals. Once the population is relocated, my sponsors will move in. Everyone profits. Who are these sponsors? You don't need to know that, Harold. Just keep doing your job and your daughter lives. That's when things went wrong. Bishop suddenly grabbed Morrison's collar, yanking him close. You know what's funny, Harold? Your daughter's latest blood work shows improvement. Almost like someone gave her the real antidote, not the temporary one I've been providing. Morrison panicked. I don't know what you're talking about. Dr. Yazzie. She figured out the antidote formula 2 weeks ago. Did you really think I wouldn't know? I have people in that hospital too. Bishop pulled out a gun, pressed it to Morrison's head. You brought them here, didn't you? Begay and his partner. They're listening right now. Through the wire, we heard Morrison whimper. Please, my daughter. Your daughter dies tonight. So do you. But first, you're going to call out to Begay. Tell him to show himself or I blow your head off. Morrison's voice cracked. Zebulon, he knows. Run. The gunshot was deafening even from 50 yards away. Morrison crumpled to the ground. Bishop stood over him, speaking loudly enough for the wire to pick up. Come out, officers. I have something to show you. Patricia grabbed my arm. It's a trap. But I was already moving, rage overwhelming caution. Morrison was a traitor, but he didn't deserve to die like that. And Bishop had just confessed to planning mass murder. I emerged from cover, weapon drawn. Adam Bishop, you're under arrest. He smiled, that same cold expression from the nursing home visit. Officer Begay, still alive, I see. My dosage calculations must have been off. Drop the weapon. I don't think so. He pulled out a small device, like a garage door opener. Do you know what this is? Dead man's switch. I release this button, and canisters hidden around this mill release enough aerosolized toxin to kill everyone within a mile, including the residential area to our east. Patricia's voice crackled in my earpiece. Zebulon, there are families in those apartments. Kids. Smart woman, your partner, Bishop said. So, here's what happens. You let me walk away, and those families live. You try to stop me, everyone dies. You're bluffing. Harold thought that too. How'd that work out for him? He stepped backward, keeping the device raised. I've already won, officer. Even if you catch me, the plan proceeds. My network is too large, too embedded. We're in your hospitals, your government, your schools. We're everywhere. That's when I noticed something. Bishop kept favoring his left side, a slight hitch in his movement. He was injured, probably from climbing through the mill's debris, and his thumb on the dead man's switch was trembling, not from fear, but from muscle fatigue. He'd been holding it too long. You know what your problem is, Bishop? I said, slowly moving to my right, forcing him to turn. You think you're smarter than everyone else, but you're not. You're just another narcissist with delusions of grandeur. Says the cop who couldn't even protect his own coffee cup. True, but I learned something from that. You taught me to think like you, and right now, you're calculating whether you can make it to your vehicle before your thumb cramps and releases that switch. His eyes flickered toward the parking area. That moment of distraction was all I needed. I didn't shoot him. Instead, I shot the ground at his feet, sending chips of concrete into his legs. He screamed, stumbling but not falling, his thumb still on the switch. Patricia emerged from another angle, her weapon trained on him. "Here's what's really going to happen," I said. "You're going to slowly lower that device and hand it to me. Then you're going to tell us where the canisters are so we can disarm them." "I'd rather die." "No, you wouldn't. If you wanted to die, you'd have released that switch already. But you haven't because you're a coward. You poison people from a distance, use others to do your dirty work. You've never had the courage to face consequences directly." His hand was shaking violently now. Sweat poured down his face. "You don't understand. They'll kill me if I'm captured. My sponsors are abandoning you as we speak. Morrison's wire transmitted everything to FBI servers. Your conspiracy is blown. It's over." That broke him. The hand holding the device dropped slightly, and I lunged forward, grabbing his wrist and forcing his thumb to stay on the switch. Patricia zip-tied his other hand while I carefully transferred the device to my own grip. "Where are the canisters?" I demanded. "There aren't any," he gasped. "It's just a transmitter. No canisters. I lied." The bomb squad later confirmed he was telling the truth. The device was a prop, psychological warfare. But it had worked long enough to create fear, and that's all Bishop had ever really needed. The arrest of Adam Bishop should have been the end. We had him on attempted mass murder, conspiracy, and dozens of other charges. The evidence was overwhelming: recordings, documents, witness testimony. But as I sat in the interrogation room across from him 12 hours after his capture, I realized we'd only scratched the surface of something much darker. Bishop had refused a lawyer, which should have been our first warning. He sat there calmly, almost amused, as FBI agents presented the evidence against him. When they finished, he leaned forward and spoke directly to me. "Officer Begay, do you know why I chose the reservations as testing grounds? Because you're a racist who sees indigenous people as expendable." "No. Because your communities are isolated, underserved by federal agencies, and when people get sick, it's often attributed to historical contamination from mining or nuclear testing. The perfect laboratory conditions." "Laboratory for what?" "The future of warfare. Biological weapons that can target specific populations based on genetic markers. My sponsors aren't just interested in land, officer. They're interested in perfecting the science of selective elimination." The FBI agents exchanged glances. This was beyond domestic terrorism. He was describing weapons development, potentially international in scope. "Who are these sponsors?" Agent Richardson, the lead interrogator, demanded. Bishop smiled. "Governments, corporations. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. They fund the research, I provide the data. The reservation poisonings were Phase 3 trials. Phase 4 was supposed to test transmission vectors, making the toxins contagious." "Contagious?" Dr. Priscilla Yazzie had been observing from behind the one-way mirror, but now burst into the room. "You were going to create a plague? A controlled plague, one that would spread through specific communities but die out before reaching others. Imagine being able to eliminate an entire ethnic group while leaving neighboring populations untouched. The ultimate ethnic cleansing tool." The room went cold. Even the veteran FBI agents looked shaken. "The antidote," I said, pieces falling into place. "It wasn't just to save specific people. It was to protect certain populations while others died. Now you're beginning to understand. Morrison's daughter, the families of my network, they all received genetic markers that would make them immune. We've been building a database of who lives and who dies." Agent Richardson stood up. "Where is this database?" "Encrypted, distributed across multiple servers. Even I don't have full access. That's the beauty of the system. Compartmentalized, decentralized. You can't stop it by arresting one person." "Then we'll arrest them all," Richardson said. Bishop laughed. You don't even know who they are. Some are people you work with. Some are people you vote for. Some are people whose products you use every day. The network is vast, Officer Begay, and it's been growing for decades. That's when Patricia entered the room with a laptop. We've decoded part of Morrison's files. You need to see this. On the screen was a list of names, titles, and locations. Government officials, military contractors, pharmaceutical executives, even some names I recognized from tribal councils. The network wasn't just vast, it was embedded in every level of society. Jesus Christ, Agent Richardson muttered. This is going to take years to unravel. Bishop leaned back in his chair. And while you're unraveling it, the work continues. I was just one researcher. There are dozens more, each working on different vectors, different toxins. Some target genetic markers, others target cultural practices. Did you know we developed a poison that only activates when combined with certain traditional medicines? Brilliant, really. Dr. Yazzie lunged at him, but I caught her arm. He's trying to provoke us. Don't give him the satisfaction. Satisfaction? Bishop looked genuinely puzzled. I'm not a sadist, officer. I'm a scientist. The deaths are just data points, necessary for perfecting the formulas. Those data points were people, I said. Theophilus Sosi was a grandmother. She had stories, memories, a family who loved her. Irrelevant to the research. That's when I realized something. Bishop wasn't just evil. He was fundamentally broken, incapable of seeing people as anything more than test subjects. But that might be his weakness. Tell me about the first one, I said. Not the first victim here, but your very first test. When did you realize you could kill without consequence? His expression shifted slightly. That's not relevant. It is to me. Was it an accident? An experiment gone wrong? He was silent for a long moment. Then, my sister, she had a rare genetic condition. I was trying to cure her, developed what I thought was a treatment. It killed her instead. But her death taught me something. That biological weapons could be precise, targeted. Her sacrifice started all of this. How old was she? 7. And you've been trying to justify her death ever since, turning it into something meaningful instead of admitting you killed your own sister. His composure cracked. I was trying to save her. And you've been killing other people's sisters ever since. Not for science, not for your sponsors, but because admitting you're a failure who murdered a child would destroy you. He stood up abruptly, his calm facade shattered. You don't know anything. I know you're terrified, not of prison, not of death, but of insignificance. You need to believe your work matters because otherwise your sister died for nothing. Bishop broke. Not completely, but enough. Over the next 6 hours he gave us names, locations, formulas. Not everything. He held back key information as bargaining chips, but enough to start dismantling the network. The raids began that night. 17 locations across 5 states. We found laboratories, stockpiles of toxins, detailed plans for biological attacks on indigenous communities worldwide. The scope was staggering. Reservations in the Amazon, Aboriginal communities in Australia, First Nations in Canada. A global conspiracy to eliminate indigenous peoples under the guise of natural disasters and mysterious illnesses. But for every person we arrested, 2 more disappeared. For every lab we shut down, we found evidence of 3 more we couldn't locate. The network adapted, evolved, went deeper underground. 3 weeks into the investigation, I was reviewing evidence at the federal building in Phoenix when my phone rang. Unknown number. Officer Begay? The voice was electronically distorted, but somehow familiar. You've done well, but you're fighting the wrong battle. Who is this? someone who knows the truth. Bishop wasn't lying about the scope, but he was wrong about the purpose. This isn't about racial elimination. It's about something worse. What could be worse than genocide? Selection. They're not trying to kill specific populations. They're trying to identify who's immune to various toxins naturally, building a catalog of genetic resistances. When the real plague comes, and it will come, they'll know exactly who will survive and who won't. They're not preparing for ethnic cleansing. They're preparing for human extinction, with only the chosen surviving. That's insane, is it? Climate change, resource depletion, overpopulation. The powerful know what's coming. They're preparing their ark, officer, and the reservation poisonings were just testing to see who gets a ticket. The line went dead. I tried to trace it but got nowhere. I shared the call with Agent Richardson and Dr. Yazzie. Richardson dismissed it as disinformation, someone trying to muddy the waters. But Yazzie had a different reaction. "It makes sense," she said quietly. "The antidotes Bishop developed, they weren't cures. They were genetic markers, tags to identify who had received protection. They've been cataloging immune systems, building a database of human biological diversity. For what purpose? Survival. If you were planning for species-level catastrophe, wouldn't you want to know which genetics were most adaptable? Indigenous populations have unique genetic markers from thousands of years of isolation. We're not victims. We're specimens in a preservation project." The thought was horrifying. Not just murder, but selective breeding on a global scale. Humanity reduced to carefully chosen genetic samples. That night, I went home to find my house had been searched. Nothing stolen, but everything slightly moved. A message. They knew where I lived, what I valued. On my kitchen table was a single photograph. My grandmother, taken recently from a distance. The threat was clear. Back off, or family members would start getting sick. I called Patricia. Her house had received the same treatment. A photo of her young nephew left on her doorstep. Every investigator on the case reported similar experiences. The network was pushing back, showing us the cost of continuing. Some investigators quit. Others requested transfers. But a core group of us persisted, driven by anger and determination. We couldn't let them win, couldn't let the poisonings continue. Dr. Yazzie made a breakthrough 2 months later. She'd been analyzing the genetic markers in Bishop's antidotes and found something unexpected. They weren't just random. They followed a pattern, a selection criteria that seemed to favor specific traits: disease resistance, longevity markers, adaptation to extreme environments. "They're building a master race," she said, disgust evident in her voice. "Not based on ethnicity, but on biological superiority. The ultimate eugenics project." We took this to the federal prosecutors, but they were hesitant. The evidence was too circumstantial, the conspiracy too vast to prosecute effectively. Some suspects had diplomatic immunity. Others were protected by classification levels we couldn't penetrate. The investigation was being strangled by bureaucracy and political pressure. That's when I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. If the system couldn't deliver justice, I'd find another way. I reached out to Janet Yazzie's network, the women who'd helped us with the stalking case. They'd been monitoring the poisoning investigation, offering assistance when they could. Now I needed more than assistance. I needed their parallel system of justice. The meeting took place in the same compound where we'd first encountered Janet. But now there were dozens of women present, from every tribal nation in the Southwest. Teachers, nurses, social workers, law enforcement, all united by loss and determination. "We know about the conspiracy," Janet said. "We've been tracking it longer than you have. Some of our sisters died in those early poisonings, before anyone knew to look for patterns. Can you help stop it? We already are. 3 of Bishop's associates have had accidents recently. Car crashes, hiking mishaps, food poisoning. Nothing traceable, nothing that looks like murder, but the network is being pruned. I should have been appalled at vigilante justice. But looking at the faces of women who'd lost daughters, sisters, mothers to the poisonings, I felt only grim satisfaction. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Information. Names, locations, supply chains. We can reach people the law can't touch." I gave them everything. Every classified document. Every protected identity. Every piece of evidence that prosecutors said was inadmissible. If the formal system failed, the informal one would succeed. Over the next year, the conspiracy began to unravel. Not through arrests and trials, but through fear. Network members started dying in ways that looked natural but formed a clear pattern. Others fled the country. Some turned themselves in, preferring prison to whatever justice the shadow network might deliver. Adam Bishop never made it to trial. He was found dead in his federal holding cell, apparent suicide by poisoning. How he got the toxin was never determined. His death was ruled suspicious but uninvestigated. Too many people wanted him silenced on both sides of the law. The mass poisoning he'd planned never materialized. The water treatment facilities remained safe, protected by both official security and unofficial guardians. The reservation populations, warned and prepared, took precautions that made large-scale attacks impossible. But the deeper conspiracy, the genetic cataloging, the selection project, that continued. We'd cut off one tentacle, but the organism survived. Files we recovered suggested similar projects in Africa, Asia, South America. The reservation poisonings had been just one experiment among many. Dr. Priscilla Yazzie published papers on the antidotes, making the formulas public. If they couldn't be kept secret, at least they could be available to everyone. She received death threats, but also Nobel Prize nominations. She continued her work, developing treatments for future biological attacks she knew were coming. Patricia transferred to federal law enforcement, using her position to monitor and disrupt the network from within. She never spoke about what she did, but sometimes names from our investigation would appear in obituaries. Deaths by natural causes that weren't natural at all. As for me, I remained a tribal police officer, but my real work happened in the shadows. I became a conduit between official law enforcement and the unofficial network of protection. When the system failed, I made sure justice found another path. The investigation led us down paths we never expected. Financial records showed connections to international pharmaceutical companies developing vaccines for diseases that didn't exist yet, but would once released. Agricultural corporations were buying land around water sources, preparing for mass population displacement. Defense contractors were building underground facilities, supposedly for national security, but actually as survival bunkers for the selected. One document we recovered was particularly chilling, a timeline labeled Cascade Protocol. It showed planned events over the next 20 years, controlled disease outbreaks, resource shortages, environmental disasters. Each event would eliminate certain populations while others, pre-selected and prepared, would survive. The reservation poisonings were listed as Test Run 7B Isolated Population Response Metrics. I tried to get this document to media outlets, but it was dismissed as conspiracy theory. Those who did take it seriously faced lawsuits, threats, sudden funding cuts. The truth was too big, too terrible for most people to accept. Janet's network proved more effective than any official investigation. They didn't need warrants or probable cause. They operated on intelligence, intuition, and a willingness to act that the legal system lacked. When a pharmaceutical executive involved in the conspiracy took a vacation to Mexico, he disappeared. When a military contractor tried to restart the poisoning program, his laboratory burned down. Cause unknown, no casualties, but all research destroyed. These weren't random acts of revenge. They were surgical strikes, carefully planned to disrupt the conspiracy without creating martyrs or attracting too much attention. The network had learned from their enemies how to operate in shadows, how to use fear as a tool, how to make people disappear. 5 years have passed since the Rough Rock poisonings. The mass graves are still being discovered. Communities worldwide reporting mysterious illnesses that match our patterns. Each discovery adds to our understanding of the conspiracy's scope, but also reveals how little we've actually stopped. Morrison's daughter survived, the real antidote saving her life. She doesn't know her father was a traitor who poisoned her for money. That secret will die with those of us who know it. Some truths are too cruel to share. She went on to medical school, inspired by Dr. Yazzie work, determined to help communities like the one her father betrayed. Theophila Tsosi's family erected a monument at Rough Rock, honoring all victims of the poisonings. It reads, "They tried to erase us with poison. We survived with medicine." Both statements are true in ways the public will never fully understand. Every year on the anniversary, hundreds gather there. Survivors, families, activists. We remember the dead, but also celebrate the living, the ones who fought back and won. The conspiracy adapted to our resistance. Instead of mass poisonings, they switched to subtler methods. Contaminated vaccines distributed through free clinics. Genetically modified foods that caused sterility in specific populations. Water additives that slowly degraded cognitive function. Each attack was deniable, explainable as accident or incompetence rather than malice. We adapted too. Dr. Yazzie established a network of independent testing laboratories, staffed by people we trusted, equipped to detect new toxins and create antidotes. Patricia used her federal position to redirect resources, ensuring vulnerable communities received clean supplies and real medical care. I continued coordinating between official and unofficial responses, a bridge between two worlds fighting the same enemy. Last month, I received another call from that distorted voice, the one that warned me about the selection project. "You've done well, Officer Begay, but the real test is coming. Not poisoning, something else. Watch for the signs. Unusual disease patterns, genetic testing programs, fertility studies on reservations. They're moving to Phase 5. What's Phase 5? Activation. They have their catalog, their selected populations. Now they're going to trigger the event that makes selection necessary. When it happens, only those they've chosen will survive. When? Soon. Within the decade. Maybe sooner if you keep interfering. They're getting desperate, making mistakes. The Phoenix lab you raided last month? That was their main production facility. You set them back years. Then we'll keep setting them back." The voice laughed, sad and knowing. "You can't stop human nature, officer. The powerful will always sacrifice the weak to ensure their own survival. All you can do is try to save as many as possible when it happens. Who are you?" There was a long pause. Then, "Someone who helped design the system before developing a conscience. Someone who's trying to atone by warning those targeted for elimination. I was there at the beginning, when it was just theoretical. Academic exercises in population dynamics and resource management. I never thought they'd actually do it. Your name? Names don't matter anymore. I'm already dead as far as they're concerned. Officially, I died in a plane crash 3 years ago, but I had to disappear. It was the only way to escape and try to make amends. Help us stop them. I am helping. Every call, every warning, every piece of intelligence I leak. But I can't come forward. They have people everywhere, even in witness protection. The moment I surface, I'm dead, and so is anyone I've been in contact with. Then tell me everything now. I can't. This line is only secure for another 30 seconds. But I'll tell you this. Check the shipping manifests for agricultural supplies going to reservation schools. They're not what they seem. And Officer Begay, trust no one in Washington. The corruption goes all the way to the top. The call ended. I immediately investigated the agricultural supplies and found hidden compounds designed to reduce fertility rates. We intercepted the shipments, replaced them with harmless substitutes. Another attack prevented, but how many others had we missed? The war against the conspiracy became my life. Every day brought new threats to investigate, new patterns to uncover, new attacks to prevent. The network grew, both official and unofficial. Indigenous communities worldwide began sharing information, creating an early warning system that transcended governments and borders. We learned their methods and turned them against them. When they tried to infiltrate our medical systems, we fed them false data that led them to waste resources on useless research. When they attempted to buy tribal land through shell companies, we exposed the connections and blocked the sales. When they sent new operatives to poison water supplies, Janet's network was waiting, but the cost was high. Good people died fighting this shadow war. Some were killed outright, others succumbed to poisons meant for larger populations. Every victory came with casualties. Every saved life was balanced by one we couldn't protect. Dr. Yazzie aged rapidly from the stress and exposure to various toxins while developing antidotes. Her hands shook constantly now, a permanent reminder of her sacrifice. But she never stopped working, driven by the memory of patients she couldn't save and the knowledge that more would die if she quit. Patricia rose through federal ranks but became increasingly isolated. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford when anyone could be compromised. She lived alone, worked alone, trusted only the encrypted messages we exchanged through channels the conspiracy hadn't discovered. And me, I became something I never expected, a soldier in a war most people didn't know existed. My official job as a tribal police officer was cover for my real work, coordinating resistance against genocide disguised as progress. The reservation had always been a place of survival against overwhelming odds. Our ancestors survived smallpox blankets, forced marches, cultural erasure. Now we faced a new form of the same old evil. Elimination disguised as evolution, murder marketed as natural selection. But we survived. We always survived. And more than that, we fought back. The water at Rough Rock runs clean now, tested daily by people who know what to look for. Children play where poison was meant to spread. Their laughter a defiance of those who wanted silence. Elders tell stories of the time the water turned deadly and the people who made it safe again. They don't know the full truth, the global conspiracy, the selection project, the shadow war being fought in their name. Maybe someday they will, but for now, they know enough. That there are those who would poison them for profit and power, and there are those who stand guard against such evil. My phone rings constantly now. Reports of new threats, updates from the network, warnings from anonymous sources. Each call could be the one that reveals Phase 5, the final attempt at controlled extinction. But each call is also proof that we're still fighting, still watching, still protecting. The conspiracy hasn't given up. Bishop's death was a setback, not a defeat. Morrison's betrayal exposed one mole, but there are others. The poisoning at Rough Rock was stopped, but similar attacks continue worldwide. The war isn't over, but neither are we. Last week, a young woman approached me at the Rough Rock Monument. She was a graduate student, researching the poisonings for her dissertation. She'd uncovered patterns everyone else had missed, connections that even our investigation hadn't found. "Officer Begay," she said, "I think I can help. My grandmother was Theophilus Sosi. She kept journals, documented things she noticed but never reported. Strange visitors, unusual illnesses, patterns going back decades. I think this conspiracy is older than you know." I looked at her. Theophila's granddaughter, carrying on the fight in her own way. The next generation, armed with education and determination, ready to continue what we'd started. "Show me," I said. She spread out her research, maps, timelines, genetic studies, historical records. The conspiracy wasn't decades old. It was centuries old, evolving with technology but maintaining the same goal: controlled population reduction targeting those deemed undesirable by those in power. The reservation poisonings weren't a new evil. They were the latest chapter in a very old story. But so was our resistance. I thought about Bishop, dead in his cell; Morrison, betrayed by his own greed; the network members who disappeared rather than face justice. They thought they were strong because they could kill. But we were stronger because we could survive. The phone rings again. Another unknown number. Another warning or threat. I answer, ready for whatever comes next. Because that's what we do. We answer the call, face the darkness, protect those who can't protect themselves. The young woman watches me, eager to help, ready to fight. I see Theophila in her eyes, the same strength, the same refusal to be a victim. The poisoners killed her grandmother, but they couldn't kill what she represented: resilience, community, the stubborn refusal to disappear. "We need to talk," I tell her after hanging up. "There's more you need to know, about your grandmother, about what really happened, about what's still happening." She nods, unsurprised. "I know. That's why I'm here. Grandma always said the water would tell the truth eventually. I'm ready to listen." We sit at the monument, under the desert sun, and I tell her everything. About Bishop and his network, about Morrison's betrayal, about Janet's shadow network, about the selection project in Phase 5, about the war being fought in shadows to prevent extinction disguised as evolution. She listens without interruption, taking notes, asking pointed questions. When I finish, she's quiet for a long moment. "So what do we do?" she finally asks. "We fight," I say. "We protect. We survive, and we make sure they pay for every life they've taken." She stands, determined. "Then let's get started. Grandma's journals mention a pattern of illnesses in the 1960s that matches what happened at Rough Rock. If this conspiracy is that old, there must be records, evidence, connections we haven't found." And so it continues. The investigation that officially ended years ago goes on through new generations, new fighters, new guardians. The poisoners thought they could eliminate us quietly, efficiently, scientifically. They didn't count on our memory, our community, our refusal to disappear. The water at Rough Rock is clean, but we test it every day. The children are healthy, but we watch for signs. The threat has passed, but we remain vigilant. Because we know the truth. The poisoners are still out there, planning, preparing, waiting for another chance. But so are we, and we'll be ready.